Welcome to this workshop of the Hopkins School Board. We have 2 agenda items this evening, and then our regular meeting will begin at 7 p.m. Our first order of business is our enrollment update, and I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed and invite our enrollment team up to the table.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and good evening to board members, student board reps, colleagues in the audience, and listeners or viewers who may be in the community. Thanks very much for joining us this evening, and welcome to the board table our presenters, Jolene Goldati, Nick Lightfoot, Taruro Chapanduka, and Pam Carmen. Thanks very much for all the work that you put into this presentation. I think, as everybody knows, even though teaching and learning is truly our most critical and core function in this school district, and safety is also a top priority, but enrollment really drives a lot of what we do. It drives our revenue, it drives how we think about our master schedules and where we're going to place students, and also what we need to do to grow our community so that we are maximizing the number of Hopkins families who are saying yes to Hopkins, and perhaps families outside of Hopkins who are really attracted to Vision 2031 and want to join us here. So we do pay close attention to our enrollment. It's very important, and we're grateful for all of the brains and the thinkers and the strategy that goes into enrollment analysis and projections and all of that. So thanks again to our presenters, and I'll give you the space to provide the enrollment update for our board.
Thank you, and on behalf of the group of individuals who have put so much time and energy and effort into this work, it's kind of humbling to be able to tell the story, because as we get into this work, and hopefully as you'll see from the information that we'll share, there are stories behind the numbers, and it is a lot of work to get into that level of detail. We will do our best to try and summarize and pull some information together. And our hope is that as we do this and as we go through the information we have now, that it can continue the ongoing dialogue as well as the ongoing consideration and planning in thinking through what lies ahead. So for you, as we go through this, we invite the conversation, we welcome the conversation. We have incredibly talented individuals here at the table who will answer to the best of our ability and may not know the entirety of the story because the story is so complex, as you will see as we get into the sets of information. Just a special thanks. There is so much that goes into pulling all of this together and the incredible time it takes to do so. So we are grateful for everyone who creates the welcoming environment, to tracks the sets of information, to help us get the data that works with some of the specific items that we'll talk about in general. Is a little bit of a leeway into that. I'll start to go through some of the slides and the basic sets of information. Other individuals will assist with that as well. At the end, we'll always be available for questions, but as we go through information, don't hesitate to stop and interrupt along the way as well. So with that, we can go ahead. Thank you, Elise. These are the touch points that kind of get impacted directly through enrollment. Budgeting, staffing, transportation planning, and system transitions. And as our team was meeting, we had the direct conversations around, yes, we want to make sure that the board understands what this looks like for us as it relates to budget. As it relates to staffing, when we look at the number of staff who we need to serve our scholars and our families. The transportation aspects, what do we know about what we are seeing and experiencing with numbers as well. The planning that is ahead for us as we think about how we estimate what that will look like at each individual building, what will that look like for us with internal programs, how do we start to think ahead collectively so that we can be in the best place that we can as we start to consider 2023, 2024, when we find ourselves in August and September ready to launch. And as well, speaking to the system transitions, as you're well aware, obviously one of the key components that we're watching is the 6th grade and 9th grade transition and looking at what that impact has for specific buildings along the way, especially as we look at the enrollment components. So that's really kind of hopefully where we'll go with the course of our conversation and the major points. Next slide, please. And part of the projection process, just so the board is aware, we take a look at a comprehensive set of data. Some of the determining factors, just so you know, that lend themselves to having some predictive value are we tend to take a look at what's happening within the charter school landscape. Charter schools can start up quickly and we can be completely unaware of them. Sometimes we are aware of them and we watch for what trends happen along the way. Because obviously those have impacts within districts as well as between districts, depending on where charter programs are located. And so we continually watch the impact of that over time. Some of the key components that we look at, of course, anytime we get into the enrollment are demographics. And what does it look like as we think through housing trends are also some of the other elements and items that go into consideration. So, for example, with charter schools, do we have any who are new here? Do we have any that have left? What does that look like over time? What has been our anticipated transition from charter schools that may serve some students, but not the whole K-12 or pre-K-12 gamut? What do we experience or expect from that transition? So, for example, even in housing trends, what does it look like as we start to see any kind of build that would be occurring within our border boundaries? All of that information is information that really gets built in, even as well as Pam will tell you, the use of births in Hennepin County to help us get some factor of what it might look like for kindergarten, because we always tend to guess what that's going to look like based on previous experience. And try to use that information to then help us get a good prediction of what we think will occur in the coming year. So we'll move forward into some of the other just general kinds of post-pandemic trends, if you can call them that, things that we're starting to see in the stories within the data. So we'll look at some of the factors that are stable. Kindergarten enrollment continues to be stable, and what we mean by that is we saw an uptick in the year post in-person, what I'll say is probably the best way I can describe it, moving from remote into more in-person, and we saw that uptick in the data that we presented to you last time. The last time we saw that bump, that was predominantly from individuals who had chosen to hold their young person at home for one more year. And we use that information to help us predict where we would look at landing this year. We factored in around that 535 mark with kindergarten enrollment. And what we are looking at with the sets of information that we have, with the mobility throughout the course of the year as we are seeing things reflected accordingly. And we're looking at that kindergarten enrollment and kindergarten resident retention as very stable factors in our predictions. So you'll see that in the sets of data when we kind of go through some of that set of information over time. But that kindergarten number looking fairly stable again for next year. As well, there's stability in the overall enrollment in and enrollment out percentages. When we think about the open enrollment experience in Hopkins, what we have seen is that that is fairly stable over the course of our past few years. No significant increases, no significant decreases. They are definitely within stable ranges, and those are factors that we're building in when we look at the overall projection. Immersion enrollment, even as we started to take a look at, as you're aware, January 15th for open enrollment is an open enrollment deadline. Just one of the first ones that really factors in as we start to look at priority placements and for any individuals who express interest right away so that we can start to develop lists and start to process those, notify families by February 15th, and then by March 15th have acceptance all built into the models. It becomes especially important in kindergarten, so that's just one of the other touch points as we think through the planning of the year. Part of that is good data because it gives us an indication of what we are seeing with our immersion enrollment. In our Juntos program at Alice Smith and Eisenhower, we have close to about 30% of our open enrollment going into those programs, as well as resident. In our Xinxing program, that has tended to trend closer to 50%. And we are seeing those similar factors occur again this year in the preliminary sets of data that we have regarding inquiry and applications that we've seen for open enrollment. The last piece in the stability component is that we aren't seeing a significant change in open enrollment from pre- and post-pandemic years. That has remained consistent. And what we have done more of, I would say, in this past year is to see if we can make greater utilization of that wait list sooner so that we can intentionally look at our years of data to help us predict where we might also be throughout the course of the year, to let us know if we have greater latitude to take more individuals in at the start of a school year, and it will kind of factor into the unexpected space, especially if we start to see things like increased mobility. In other words, if we're going to see increased mobility during the year, can we start the year with maybe a little bit larger perspective, knowing that by the time school starts and by the time we make our way into those first few weeks in September, we know that we will land in a space where it would originally be intended. And we can talk a little bit more about some specifics with that. But one of the things that we are seeing that is a little bit more unexpected this time around is that we are seeing increased mobility at all buildings and grade levels. That mobility is, for the most part, distributed between two areas within school mobility. What we mean by that is during the school year, and then also mobility over the course of the summer months. We are seeing larger increases in that. Where we are seeing that mobility is the second point. As we do our tracking and as we get the best set of data we can regarding the reasons that individuals make decisions, is that we are looking at the set of data which shows that we are seeing more families move out of district, out of Minnesota, and even larger percentages than we've seen before out of the country. So we know that that has been an increase, specifically within the past year. And as we were kind of starting to take a look at some of the data, what's interesting is that where we are now is reflecting a little bit more of some of the numbers that we've seen as we were kind of unpacking it in 2016, 2017. So we're starting to see a little bit more mobility in those kind of pre-pandemic years that we were experiencing some as well. Last piece on there is the slight decrease in the upcoming school year and 5-year projections. Since we are seeing that greater mobility and we are seeing larger movement, part of what we also look at, and if those that were on the board previously when we did the housing study, part of what we know about the housing stock within the Hopkins School District in the analysis is there's certain housing stock which has a tendency to attract families with younger kiddos, and depending on that kind of quality of housing stock, you can expect different shifts in enrollment when there are home sales. As part of that, what we are noting is that we are seeing more mobility, but what we aren't necessarily seeing, as we have seen in previous years, is that when those homes are repurchased for, I'm trying to think if there's a better word than repurchased, but we'll just say repurchased because that's what I can come up with. Is that all right?
That one sounds good.
When those homes are repurchased, we aren't necessarily seeing that they are backfilled with similar numbers of young people within a family, or if they are refilled with families with children as the next owner. So with that set of data, we have seen some increase in mobility and a slight decrease in the overall set of enrollment, at least from the data from last year. So we can take a look on some of these next slides. It'll go into that in a little bit more detail. What we mentioned before is, and this is what I just kind of alluded to, but it's that pronounced level of mobility. We can look at, we did some work even kind of, piecing out some of the grade levels. And I think it was third grade into fourth that we did a more detailed analysis just to get a little picture of what that's happening like. And I don't remember, Pam, was that what? That number just at that grade level was, I don't know, do we have a
20
slide?
students higher than it's historically been over the last 5 years.
And so just even at one grade level, just as an example, that's one of those spaces that can kind of show, hard to predict over multiple years unless we kind of have started to see that. Because part of what we look at is a cohort advancement to say, if we've experienced this over the past 4 years in a grade 3 to grade 4 kind of transition, it's likely that we'll see that move into the next year. But what we are seeing more of this year is that significantly throughout the course of the year, that there was more mobility than we have seen in the past. So utilizing that information, not to be too much of a determining factor in the next year projection, but to be enough of a consideration that we do plan for that in the overall work that we do to arrive at the end values that we'll talk about here in the last slide. So, reasons for departure. We have been doing, and the enrollment office has been doing wonderful work at really being very intentional about tracking when we get information that we know so that we can continue to look at this over time. And what we all as a group really were more struck by was the moved out of district, moved out of state, moved out of the country. Those are larger than we have seen in the past when we look at the overall impact for the 21-22 school year. And we can do that now, of course, because the year is complete, and we can utilize that set of information as we start thinking about what's happening in 22-23, but what that will also mean for us with the 23-24 projections. Transfer to another district has remained consistent, and that's in the opening why I said that's stable. So when you look at that 86, know that that's a reference. That has been fairly typical. That hasn't risen much, hasn't fallen much. It just tends to be that level that we have experienced before. But the ones that really were more striking to us that we did a little bit more of the depth with were those that had moved out of district, out of state, and out of country. Anything on that one that I missed that others would highlight?
No, that's good.
Okay. On the next slide, a little bit more on the open enrollment. I really like the quotes that were here, that we hear from families over time regarding why people choose Hopkins. As I've said before, those numbers remain consistent, they remain strong, and there are, of course, a multitude of reasons. But part of the reasons why, and you can read those on the slide, that commitment to rigorous curriculum, inclusive school community, all throughout as we speak with families and learn more about what it is that is drawing them to Hopkins. Growth, caring, commitment, those Vision 2031 values, as we look at that reflected, and even in some of the spaces where our students have just talked about the experience of the feeling of love that gets created as they make their way through our programming. So with that, we'll get into a little bit more on the increases, as you can see. As we start to look at 145 scholar increase from 18-19 to 22-23. Not much variability, little bits here, little bits there, maybe 1 year a little more, maybe 1 year a little bit less. Part of that always is due to birth rates. It's due to location. We tend to draw, as you'll see in the upcoming slides, we tend to draw from similar areas. Part of that is due to proximity. As we look at those numbers, we can go into the next one. You'll see that the top incoming districts in all of these cases are really proximate to the borders that we share with other districts. Those have remained, those percentages have remained consistent over time. Definitely there are outliers when we think about one or two individuals from different spaces throughout the state. We'll also get into a little bit more the open enrollment that comes in now through virtual EDU. Because as you think about that geographic location in a virtual program, and you look at these experiences with the in-person component, we know that there is a reach that was not previously available to us, and some of that data is reflected when we get to the virtual EDU in some of the slides that we'll show you there. Anything else on that one? As you can see, the total open enrollment by grade and by site is another set of information that we track. You can see consistently, if you look at kindergarten and 150 at kindergarten, you can see at grade 12 we're at 140. So we know that those numbers remain fairly consistent with what we are looking to bring into the system. And as we think about predictions for next year, that tied directly into the budgeting and the expectation of revenue that comes along that gets generated by ADM, average daily membership. Is that my right acronym? Good deal. And then you can see by sites as well. Certain sites have typically drawn more for open enrollment. And in part, there again, to proximity to locations within other districts. And so you'll see that reflected in that data set. Virtual EDU. And this is one that I think we can go into a little bit more depth, specifically because now after a year, we have a good set of data so that we can kind of take a look at, so now that we have experienced, what did we experience? And this was, I think, another big takeaway is when you look at the non-resident percentage of the population that are part of virtual EDU, you will see, and if we go back to that last slide and just say, wow, 40, 37, 38, and we go back to that last previous slide before this one, Elise, just for reference. Not only are some of those, but when you think about percentages, those percentages on many of those other schools, virtual EDU has a larger percentage of open enrollment than most of our elementary programs, except maybe Meadowbrook. But, and mirrors that almost of Shinching. So if you'd like to go back to the next slide, you can see particularly there as we look at the elementary, secondary, and total, those are strong percentages, and what they really indicate to us is that, yes, we are seeing residential interest, we are also seeing non-resident open enrollment interest, and we know that there's a larger percentage to reach even further beyond neighboring districts and into outstate or other opportunities within Minnesota as well. And as well, we also track open enrollment out. As I've said before, that remains consistent. There, like we draw in from 40 plus, we open enroll out to 33. I mean, those have been consistent over time as well. You'll see that, yep, proximate to Minnetonka, Edina, Eden Prairie, and St. Louis Park. A little bit with intermediate District 287, but for the majority of this has been a consistent factor for us over the years that we've been tracking enrollment. Charter schools, as we mentioned in the opening, as we start to look at charter schools, you'll see that over time, as we've looked at Hopkins residents choosing Isla as one example, you'll see that a program that moves to another location, one that used to be situated within Hopkins but has moved to Edina, you'll see some of the impacts as we take those numbers into consideration. And so knowing what that looks like, we process that information in some of the trending that we do and some of the predictions that we make. And as well, the data that we take into consideration as we build in the formulas for the construction of the anticipated projections. And with this, I really don't think that we saw a ton of new programming that caught us by surprise. I think it was just more our ability to get some of this. And this is, I would say, Pam and Jolene, you better than I, but trying to get some of this data is also a little bit challenging because they aren't held to same timelines that public schools are, but we do our best overall to collect this. Sometimes it just takes more time to get this set of information.
And I think I'd just add, we are seeing a slight increase in Eagle Ridge, but in total, it's more of a shift as opposed to an increase in total charter out. So
Kindergarten, 546 on October 1, 2022. Like I said, we were looking at around 535 was kind of our anticipated number using birth rates and previous trends. We knew that 535 was a little bit conservative, but obviously if we're looking at for budgeting purposes, we want to make sure that we are erring on the side of being a little bit more conservative so that we can plan accordingly, and then if we need to adjust in our budgeting, we build in targeted staffing so that if we do get increases, we can respond accordingly with staff to make sure that we can follow up with any differences that we might experience at the start of the school year. The next slide. As we also mentioned, the interest in overall within the immersion programming that we look at and look toward. You'll see that information as well captured here. We see consistent interest in Chinese and Spanish immersion, specifically as we look toward that kindergarten in a consistent fashion. And what we know about that kindergarten entry point, especially with our immersion programs, is that the retention is very strong in there. And our strongest sets of retention are in our immersion programs. So our kindergarten enrollment projections versus actual. This is a key entry point because really what we know is that our greatest likelihood of engaging families for a longer period of time is getting them to engage in kindergarten. And one of the other areas that we are starting to do more work with is our pre-K. And as we get broader sets of pre-K data, looking at the rates of retention that we have with pre-K families, and we know that that is incredibly high. And as we increase those opportunities and abilities to engage with families sooner, looking at the ability then to potentially impact and influence those kindergarten projections and even higher rates of retention over time. But as you'll see, pretty much our projections have been relatively spot on when we look at the impact, except as we mentioned for that 21-22, when we really had a large percentage of individuals look at a holdback in 2021 and then enter in 21-22. And we are looking again, as I said before, in 22-23, really at kind of that 535 mark, which is where we thought we would be this year. We think that that's a really good number to utilize as we continue to build for that. So with that, this is really kind of, I think we're coming down to this kind of just initial last slide. And I think, Tariro, do you want to cover this last one just with some of the budget impacts and how we're thinking about the utilization of what we've done so far?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Lightfoot. Yeah, actually, this last slide basically summarizes all the information which has been shared by Dr. Lightfoot in terms of budgeting and obviously using our projected numbers, which we try to be very conservative, just looking at trends and also putting into consideration some of the historical information which have become skewed because of the numbers we've seen due to the pandemic. We definitely are seeing a flat overall aggregated enrollment across our system, and trying to also be very conservative with our approach in terms of how the enrollment numbers determines the revenue coming into the district, and also how we start planning and staffing our buildings, and at the same time factoring in placement into our different spaces. The other component which is at play is also the 6-9 grade configuration. So as we start to allocate resources, we might start to see some shift in terms of how allocations have happened in the past and how we are seeing these trends in terms of the 6th graders being at the junior or the middle schools, and the 9th graders at the high school, as well as some of the shifts we've seen in terms of movement, as alluded by Dr. Lightfoot. So basically, we are trying to be conservative, so you'll probably see as we start to allocate resources, we might see a different outcome compared to what has really transpired in our system in the past.
So that should bring us to kind of the initial sets of data that we wanted to put in front of you. Our hope is that that generates more questions. We do have a wealth of data, and part of our challenge was how much do we present, not to overwhelm, but to hopefully engage some dialogue. And as we have some of that data in front of us or here as questions that you have, we'll continue to share that as well. We'll take notes on if there are additional areas of interest that we can provide additional information for as well. And especially as we think about right now, the timing of this to influence and to give us solid data for revenue projections, as Director Chapanduka identified, and also to be thinking about ways that as we continue throughout the course of the year, that we engage with this data in more detail as well. Just as an FYI, sometimes, and maybe it's a little bit oversharing, you have dreams at night about what you think the board might ask you, and you wake up in the morning and walk in and say, hey, I had this dream. I thought they might ask us about, not kidding, I thought they might ask us about, okay, so what does it look like for our retention rate with how many of our seniors have been with us over periods of time, and how long have they been here, and what does that look like with the academic influence? Yes, it wasn't a nightmare. But those levels of detail and being able to walk into the office and Pam said, yeah, we did that a few years ago. I think I can pull up some of these other pieces and other slides. And I use that just as an example to say, you know, if there are those areas of curiosity, we do have a wealth of data, and we hope that as we do our work to become even more data informed, that we hope the dialogue can help us look at additional areas of consideration as well.
Well, thank you so much, Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot and the enrollment team. And I know that there are many more members of this team who are not at the table tonight, so really appreciate your contributions to the data collection and the report. Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot, I would like to apologize for haunting your dreams, first of all. And actually, to your point, I thought that this presentation really anticipated a lot of questions that the board might have, given the types of questions we've asked in the past during this annual presentation. So it was really great to see the specific tracking of students who have left the district, why they've left, that engagement that we're doing to really understand where students are going and why. You know, that has been a topic of conversation at this table multiple times since I've been on the board, and to see some more specific data around that was really helpful. I'd like to open it up to my board colleagues for any questions or comments.
Just had a quick comment. I, of course, pay attention whenever District 287 is mentioned, and just wanted to make sure that I know it might be from our perspective here in Hopkins that they're enrolling out of the district, but in actuality, they are still our students because we are a member district of 287. So just wanted to clarify that and make sure that we aren't misrepresenting those numbers, because they are still our students.
Sure.
There was a slide that showed reasons for departures, and I think one of them was care and treatment, maybe 70 something. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I was just wondering if what the number is, if you could just remind us. And then how does that compare to previous years? Because I'm thinking about the mental health of our students and whether or not our impact this past year has been larger than it's been in previous years.
I would say the initial data that we're looking at, and I'll look back and see if Fonda's back there as well. And it really does take a team with the narrative and the story. Yes, and the care and treatment is individuals for a period of time or extended period of time, looking at a care and treatment program, which can be residential, which can be day treatment, for specific sets of circumstances in their lives that would indicate that that programming would be better facilitated for the needs that they are displaying, and that their needs need to be met in a higher level of care and treatment within programs that are located outside of Hopkins.
And I would just add, the majority of those students aren't leaving Hopkins. They're coming back. They're just not there for part of the year, so it is impacting our average daily membership, which is impacting our revenue. So we have to factor them into the analysis in our equation.
And even though it's for,
Going on for the number of students enrolled. And the component that has to happen is that
Director Contreras, you'll probably have to come up here so that the audience can see you. You'll have to use a microphone, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm looking at the slide now, it's 71 students.
And that's the current number?
This was the number for 21-22 school year.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Contreras. We like it when you're at the table with us.
the number for care and treatment is increasing, and the component that has to happen is an educational component. So if folks enroll in a care and treatment program that doesn't have a schooling piece, then they are dually enrolled with us, and they usually go for like half day so that they can get that educational piece and the care and treatment component. Many programs do have them, but we send students based on their mental health referrals from outside providers as far as Wisconsin and other areas. Because oftentimes we fill up in the state because there are competing spots with other districts. And so students can go as far as Wisconsin, and then they re-enroll with us when they come back. So, but we are seeing that number climb. Which
So
is
the
good
seven-
that students are accessing it, but it may have it may impact our enrollment here.
Thank you for those clarifications, Director Contreras. So I'm wondering, the 71 that we're seeing there, are these students, does that include the dual enrolled students, or are these students who have totally left to go get the care and treatment they need, and that we hope we can welcome them back?
I'm not sure how that data is pulled, but my guess is it's those that have left.
That's correct. So
Okay.
these are the actual ones that have left for a day, 2 days, 3 days, 6 months. So these are the actual students that are exiting for the whole day. These are not partial concurrent enrollment type of situations.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Westmoreland,
Director Adams.
I'll ask a question that I know the answer to, but I think some of our viewing public may be curious. With all the residential development that's taking place along the Southwest Light Rail, why are we projecting enrollment declines over the next 5 years?
I can speak to that a little bit after having a recent conversation with members of the city administration in Hopkins, is that in part of what we're looking at is some building and some development of the housing areas there, looking at affordable housing, looking at other kinds of housing opportunities that aren't predominantly, as I mentioned before in the presentation, like maybe a single family home that might generate 2.2 on average young people into a system. It may be more of a housing unit that might generate a smaller number. So when we look at that overall build and that overall projection, the indications that we have received so far and the information that we have is that it hasn't necessarily adjusted much of the overall enrollment. I'll use an example of even Golden Valley, if you're familiar of the developments that have gone up right off of 394 and Zinnia area up there, close to Meadowbrook.
Right.
When you look at that, the number of housing units, if you were just to look at the number of housing units, you would wonder. But then when you look at the individuals who those are marketed to and the individuals who have chosen to be there, our overall impact based on those housing units has not been such that we have seen any dramatic shift for Meadowbrook, even in its proximity to those builds, if that's helpful.
And the other thing I would just add to that, a lot of the times, some of those newer complexes also have a demographic that it attracts that are more highly mobile. So as we're seeing that increase in mobility, we also have to factor that into it to see, okay, what does that look like then for the longer term over the 5 years? So it's a little bit of both of those pieces coming into play with those numbers.
Thank you.
As long as we're talking about housing, wondering too how much affordability plays into it. Speaking as somebody who recently had to find a new place to live within the Hopkins School District, the affordability piece was certainly challenging. And then to find a place that was like, you know, you were talking about size and how many people can fit in more affordable units. I only have one child. But they take up a lot of space. So, so thinking about, I hope they're not watching. So thinking about, you know, how much affordability plays into this. You referenced the housing study that we did 3 years ago. Affordability was a major theme of that, and we know both anecdotally and through the data that we have students, we have families who can't afford to stay in the Hopkins School District, need to find housing elsewhere, and then you know, have to figure out a way to provide their own transportation, and that is often really burdensome, and so then they end up leaving us. And we know as school board members who interact with people in the community that there are also students who live in other districts who would be interested in attending Hopkins but cannot find affordable places to live here. So wondering how much the topic of affordability has come up in some of those interviews that you've done, conversations with people who have left the district. I'm thinking about this with my advocacy hat on, and wondering if you have a bit more data around that.
Well, I think that's really interesting. So currently, we're only doing exit. We've just started this process of doing exit surveys of everybody who's left the district. But right now, we're really zeroing on who's left the district by choice, meaning that, you know, like they're choosing to open enroll to a different district or private or something like that. And we're actually not looking at those who have like moved out for some other reason. And I think your question makes me wonder maybe that should be included in to make sure that there's not a blind spot of something else going on in the climate that could affect things. So I really appreciate the question, and I think it's gonna maybe change how we do exit surveys in the enrollment office.
Absolutely, and thank you for being open to it. I think that there's also sometimes a hesitancy to talk about affordability, and that there's still so much stigma with, you know, like who can afford to live where, and we know that it's a big problem. I mean, nationwide, right? We're in a housing crisis. And we certainly know that it's a big problem here in the western suburbs. And so I think having more information around that would be helpful. And it would be helpful for us as electeds as we're interacting with our colleagues on city councils and at the county to be able to bring forward some of that data to really make the case for, you know, why we need more affordable housing within our district specifically, and then of course throughout Hennepin County.
Thank you.
And I think you hit upon some of the other components that as we look at and as we do our planning for serving the needs of the individuals who are in our space, what does that look like and how might that shift given whatever set of data is in front of us with what we might be experiencing? So for example, if we are seeing larger populations of homeless and highly mobile, how do we construct experiences that support and lend themselves on an academic front as well, to ways that we can plan accordingly to make sure services are designed and delivered effectively. I think that's another key area. And one that even in the data set that we presented here, and that's why I wrote it down, I think one of those pieces would be another data point that we should make sure we include as we look at that as well.
We do have a presentation coming up, I think it's in 2 meetings. Rhoda and I were looking at agendas together yesterday about students who are experiencing homelessness and highly mobile students. And so I think that will be an opportunity to do a deeper dive into that area as well. So just so the board's aware that that's coming up.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
Nick, you indicated that the biggest area for potential growth is a virtual EDU. And I'm just curious, what are we doing to market that right now? And are there any plans to increase the efforts to market that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So what we're really experiencing with virtual EDU is trying to figure out in this post-pandemic environment what an online learning experience looks like. And yet, like, we're in the post-pandemic environment, and there are still families that are choosing perhaps an online experience because of health reasons, or like that's still in the climate for sure. And then there are, people. I think like we're still the trends and the behaviors that have changed after the pandemic are still sort of settling a little bit. What we do know is that, like, for example, when we market for immersion, there's a lot of planning and research and thought that goes into that. I mean, we have had people come to our information nights for immersion, and we ask how old their child is, and they're like, well, I'm in utero, like it's like not born yet. Like that's how much planning goes into it for some people, and that's an extreme example, but it does happen. And for sure, it's something that like it's a year of thought or more, and so like we can really plan for that, and we can really build a calendar with open enrollment in mind and all of those factors. With a virtual school, what we're seeing is that the trends are very different. How people enroll, it's more of for whatever reason, brick and mortar isn't working for me at this moment, and I need an online experience like in a week. Like that's when I need it. And so it isn't the same. Like so we're seeing over the year, enrollment for virtual EDU has increased as people are realizing for whatever reason they need an online experience. That doesn't happen with immersion. That doesn't happen with some of the other programs that we market. So it's really changing the way we look at it. Like we don't necessarily need to build information sessions around a certain calendar. What we need to build is opportunities for families to learn more about virtual EDU whenever they need to. And what we need to do is make sure that we are out there, so when people have that moment for whatever reason, like I need a online experience, they think of virtual EDU because they've seen it out there. So we're starting to kind of pivot because we're realizing it's just distinctly different in terms of what it offers, who it's for, and how you might enroll into it.
The other thing, and correct me, Jolene, on some of the market research data that we've looked at, is that there is, I want to make sure I get the term right, that there is an interest, we know, in blended opportunities internally. And is there also that interest externally? Are there ways that we can provide additional experiences that other districts may not, but we could do that virtually? I think there are also those other areas in strategic exploration that are designed to target populations of students who might have a need that we just haven't think about because we have thought brick and mortar, and are now how do we expand that space? What might it look like if we're able to look more at care and treatment facilities with some virtual components? How do we think about those relationships and those partnerships in new and evolving ways that we just haven't before, now that we have a foundation to use to build from?
And just also kind of add some more context. One of the things we've found is the the majority of the students who are actually enrolling in virtual EDU are students of color. So that's an area where we are trying to identify and go dig deeper and see why that trends are like that.
Chair Westmoreland?
Yes.
Might we see as, I know we just got done with a big budgeting piece, but, or I guess, anyway, as we go into projecting for the next year, will we see some differences in the marketing budget as we try to adapt some of the things that we have done in order to tell the Hopkins story in this kind of more agile, is it email marketing? Is it social media? Is it, I don't know, there's got to be a variety of new ways. It's obviously not my area of expertise, but are those discussions on what it will take monetarily to find those new audiences happening, and will we see it in our upcoming budget talks?
Yeah, so what we've done with the virtual EDU is when we initially implemented the program, we used some of our ESSA dollars as the initial investment. Since majority of the students were mostly organic, that means they were just moving from the building into the virtual environment. And what we are trying to do now is to figure out a model which is sustainable in terms of how do we capture students who are actually coming outside of our internal population. And those components will definitely lead to more revenue coming into the district, because the current structure actually creates competition between the brick and mortar and the virtual environment. And at the same time, when you are looking at finite resources, it becomes very difficult. And maybe Jolene can speak to some of the work we've done with FNF in terms of marketing strategies and what we can do to capture, some of these students into our system.
Yeah, what we've done, so FNF is a branding research firm that we've used in the past. They've done our rebrand refresh and, yep. So they have helped us do market research to help us understand who might be open to an online experience and sort of what that experience should look like. So we have an understanding of that, but that actually doesn't get at the marketing piece of it. And so that is work that we're in discussion with, like building out kind of like you would call it a journey map, like who is this person and where do they come from and how do they transition throughout the enrollment experience into virtual EDU, and what does that look like? And then also, in addition to that, looking at a marketing plan that is probably focused on social media and different media buys to get at these target markets. So that is work that we're considering expanding on with them. So we have beyond just the market research piece, but a plan that we can execute.
Any additional questions or comments for the enrollment team?
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
So I had a particular question regarding slide 6 with the moved out district 100, moved out state 47, moved out country 40, and noted that it sounded like the numbers were higher than in the past. Was that like the past couple of years or just year over year? That percentage had shot up a lot higher than what we were expecting.
Year over year.
Yeah, I mean, it has continually increased. And what we're seeing is the rate of increase is larger than we've seen before, if that helps.
Yeah, it is. Thanks.
We know that enrollment is a foundational part of our budgeting, which is why we received this report. And we will be receiving our CFAC, Citizens Financial Advisory Committee report at an upcoming board meeting, and these two pieces of information really help us as a board and as a community understand the parameters around our upcoming budget cycle. And we know that Director Chapanduka and his team are just like working tirelessly on that and compiling information to bring before the board. So we really appreciate this presentation because it gives us such a great idea of where we've been, where we are currently, and then some of those projected enrollments. You know, Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot commented that we've been, we don't actually do anything up here with enrollment. We just received this report that the enrollment team has been really accurate in projections, which is true, and it's always so impressive to me. I know that you are really skilled at what you do, and it's always just really wonderful how close we can get to that so that we can really have an accurate budgeting process. So thank you for bringing this information before us this evening, and we will look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move to our next agenda item for the workshop, which is our 2023 board officers and committee assignments. So each January, we organize ourselves as a board. The reason we do it at this time is that when new board members are elected, their terms begin in January. So all of our terms begin in January and end in December of different years, of course. And so, you know, when we're so used to being on a school year calendar, it feels a little odd to do this in the middle of the year. But I just wanted to explain to our community members why this happens now. So the first thing we'll talk through is officer positions. So tonight during our regular meeting, we will elect a chair, a vice chair, a treasurer, and a clerk. And if you click on the document that's linked in the board packet, you'll see who has held these positions in 2021, currently, and then Elise will be adding to that document live as we are talking through this here at the workshop. And then after that, we'll talk about our committees and who would like to serve on each committee. So let's talk through officer appointments first. Is there anyone who is interested in being chair? I'm just trying to make eye contact with every single person. I would be honored to continue to serve as your chair. I would also be more than willing to step back if there is somebody else who is who wants to be chair.
I would be excited to nominate you.
Well, thank you. I will accept your nomination at the meeting when the time comes. So there we go. Spoiler alert. Okay. Who is interested in being vice chair?
I would be interested in continuing. If that's acceptable to the board.
I would be excited to nominate you.
Well, there we go. I mean, you don't have to say it, but would you accept that nomination if Katie nominated you?
I would. Like, what if I was like, no?
That'd be quite a switch up. Okay. And next, the coveted position of treasurer.
I'd be willing to serve or not willing to serve, or not serve, depending on what the decision of the board or the board is.
Steve and I have similar vibes tonight. Director,
Could I just ask a quick question?
Please.
It might be helpful as we have the discussion, or maybe we'll have it during our meeting, but to just give everyone kind of an idea of what the culture of the board has historically been around officers serving. Like, is it, we try and mix it up every year? Do we try and have continuity? Because I personally find a lot of value in Treasurer Adams' role in continuing that role just because of the historical context he brings to that. So I just thought that's an important piece to communicate with our community. So it doesn't seem like we're just, if you're in a position, you stay.
Yeah. So, I mean, procedurally, as I mentioned before, this conversation happens every January. So new people have the opportunity to step into roles. And I think, you know, I'm thinking about the time I've been on the board. Steve and I are now the longest serving board members. And Steve has much more historical context than I do. But my impression was that chairs changed every 1 to 2 years.
Roughly,
Yeah.
yeah.
And vice chairs as well.
You're testing my, my memory here. Yeah, I'd say probably about the same, so.
I agree with everything that Shannon's saying about just the historical knowledge, and it's not just that, Steve, that you bring to the treasurer role, but it's really that you have your finger on the pulse of these broader ed finance trends, you know, through your involvement with the LAC, with AMSD, MSBA, and all of that. And so that context you bring is really helpful.
Well, I appreciate that, but if someone else has a burning desire to count the beans, I'd be willing to go along with it. But I don't see any here at the table.
I feel like we should have come ready with like sales pitches, right? Like a super cool part
You
is
really
that you
wanna
get to
do
meet with
this.
Director Chapanduka, who's really cool. Okay, well, it looks like Steve will continue to serve really well in that role.
If someone would nominate me, who would
I
say?
nominate you, Steve, for sure.
I'd be happy to do a sales pitch on the benefits of being clerk,
I knew you were.
just to see if somebody else really wants to step it up. So here's what it is, guys. You get to say everybody's name every time there's a roll call. And the really cool part about that is you get to like learn their names really well. You're not gonna forget them. The other thing is sometimes you can throw a curveball and like put somebody's name out of order and see if they're paying attention. So you're kind of like a mastermind of the situation.
Oh, yeah.
Then you get
sounds
to
cool.
sign documents every single time you come to a meeting. It's really cool. Like your signature's on all sorts of stuff. Elise always gives you a pen, so if you forgot a pen, you've got a pen. It's great. So if anybody would like to
Wow.
be
I think
clerk moving forward, I would be happy after 3 glorious years of serving as clerk.
You want to trade, you
step-
sound so much more fun.
I
than
would
what
be,
I'm
I
doing.
would be happy to step down, step away. It'll take some training, I'm sure. But if anybody's interested.
There is also another benefit of being clerk. You don't have to read the previous board meeting's minutes as part of the packet to prepare for the meeting because you approve it.
Yep, you get it from Elise in advance.
It's like you're given time.
So, good times.
Katie, that is so much better than the sales pitch I gave you 3 years ago when I was trying to find a person to take my clerk position, so.
You know,
Tanya looked really excited when you were talking about it.
I think,
just,
I
you know,
mean,
don't
there's a
wanna-
lot,
Interest over there.
there's a lot of really wonderful things.
I saw Jason smiling, like, clerk.
She sold me very
All right, would you like me to nominate you?
Sure.
Woo! Clerk Ross, that has a nice ring to it. All right,
Love it.
switching it up.
I like it.
Oh, this is much more exciting
Jen's
than
like,
I thought.
why didn't I
prepared a
come
better
with a
sales
sales pitch for board chair?
All of those between the workshop and the meeting, hey, don't you want to be chair? Conversations did not work out for me. Okay. Great. So we will officially vote on those at the meeting. I refreshed myself on the Roberts Rules protocol for officer elections that we do once a year, including the somewhat awkward asking if there are any nominations 3 times, so
Yeah.
you can look forward to that. I know Steve likes that part, so we got to keep that in. Okay, let's move on to committee assignments. So we'll start with our out-of-district committees. And, I appreciate that Shannon brought up kind of this idea of like, what's the culture been? Do we switch it up? Do we stay on the same committees? And, I would say it's really up to you as individual board members. I know when I was a newer board member, it was helpful to be able to serve on the same committee for a couple of years. I'm thinking about policy committee, for example, just to really it's like I felt like I was just getting an understanding of it, and then we had to switch things up, and I'm like, no, I want to stay in for another year. So that's certainly a possibility. And then also thinking about kind of the time commitment associated with different committees, and if you're interested in one but not really sure what the time commitment is, the people who currently serve on it can give you more information as well. So let's talk through out of district first. So AMSD. Currently, Steve is our representative and Jason is the alternate. Who might be interested? Steve, are you interested in staying on?
Sure. If no one else wants to get up at 7 in the morning on the first Friday of the month.
But there is coffee and breakfast, right?
There is, yeah. Very good pastries.
And can you still attend virtually?
You can attend virtually,
Oh,
so. It sounds more attractive to you, Jen?
to attend virtually?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, it's like sleep pastries,
Well, also just like, I don't want to get in my car.
Steve didn't sell you that you have to drive to St. Paul.
Have you attended some of them, Jason?
I was about to until I saw how far I had to go at 7 in the morning. Sorry for anybody who's from St. Paul.
It's a hike from here.
So Steve, it sounds like you're willing to stay on.
Sure.
Jason, would you be willing to stay on as
Yes.
alternate? Okay.
I do it virtually, Steve.
Okay, all right. You're always welcome to ride. I'll give you a ride.
Not at 6 in the morning.
Next up is Intermediate District 287. Shannon has been doing a wonderful job of representing us on the 287 board. Katie has been the alternate. Is there interest in this position?
Yeah, I know we chatted a little bit about it prior, as Elise mentioned to us that they were looking for a nomination. And I know, Shannon, you've been really invested in 287 and liking your work there. So if you are still interested, I think that continuity would be really great.
Thanks. I also agree. We just went through the process of hiring a new superintendent. And there already is going to be movement on that board of people who didn't get reelected to their home district. And so just feeling like having as much continuity in the board to support the new superintendent as possible is something I'd like to do. So if other board members are comfortable with it.
Sure.
Wonderful.
I'll be your alternate still if you want, though,
Great, thank you.
unless anybody else wants to.
Wonderful. Let's move on to Minnesota State High School League.
That's me.
think-
I've,
Have they met at all?
no.
During your term?
I reached out to our new AD, let him know it was me. Crickets. I mean, not from him. I mean, he said, thank you, I'll let you know, but like from that particular committee, crickets. So I don't know if it's defunct,
No, no, it's not,
they're just not meeting.
I guess.
Yeah,
Maybe
I was
they're-
never called upon either when I was serving.
Maybe they're shunning us.
I don't get it.
No. We just haven't had any hot button issues this year.
So if somebody else has an interest in it, it's a real big time commitment.
I'll find out if they're meeting.
Okay.
So you're comfortable staying?
Yes, yeah, that's fine.
Sounds good. So next we'll move to our in-district committees. So the cities and board steering committees. Currently Rachel and Steve serve on it. Has that group been meeting, Rachel and Steve?
We did one. right, at the end
Yeah.
of last year.
We haven't met so far during this school year.
I can say that personally, I am very interested in it and would love them to meet a little bit more. And so I have no problem staying on it. But again, this is not a super large time commitment role.
Right.
If there is someone else who's interested in it, and I don't know if there's any nudging or action that would be required on our part to make sure they
Just not just the superintendent.
just run. Okay.
Any other interest? Steve, are you willing to stay on that
I
as well?
am.
Okay. Great. So I know last year we did not assign someone to our schools and communities in partnership because that was kind of being revamped. Rhoda, should we be thinking about assigning someone to it this year?
It is actually being revitalized as we speak, so if there is a board rep, then we can let them know when those meetings are being held.
Great. Is there someone who would be interested in serving on that? We can have up to 2 members.
I would volunteer for that. I enjoyed being on that committee.
Great.
I would also have interest in that one.
Okay, and Jason, you as well?
I'll let Katie go in front of me, but, yeah.
Okay, so I want some clarification regarding Skip and the Hopkins, what do you call it? Community ed, because they've combined. So out of curiosity, how is that working?
Director Fisher?
So Director Connor, are you talking about the
Thank you.
Community Education
Yeah.
Advisory Committee?
Yeah.
Has
Oh,
this,
so
has the
those two
SKIP
have
and Community
combined?
Education
They
Advisory
combine
Committee
their
combined?
meetings. No.
You just quickly
Oh.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yep, so we, in realizing that the SKIP committee, the Schools and Communities in Partnership, had so much overlap with the Community Ed Committee, the Advisory Committee, we decided to just combine them.
Right.
Just to save, everybody a trip and to make it more convenient.
So then do we not need a separate thing because then
Right.
we already have, Shannon and Katie serving. So since these two are combined, should we just make it one on this sheet?
Yes, I
Yeah.
see that Elise is making the change
Yeah.
right now.
Okay, great.
Mhm,
Yeah,
Perfect.
thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the question. Thank you, Director Fisher.
Yeah, that's why I wanted a clarification because I formerly served on the Community Education Advisory Committee, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and it sounds like you probably have more continuity then, because they kept meeting when Skip kind of stopped.
Yeah, yeah, they did
So is that
meet.
something that you would be interested in continuing?
I
or are you
did like
feeling?
it quite a lot, but, I mean, obviously only 2 can serve, so I don't
I'm
know.
fine, I like that continuity too. I
Yeah.
think especially coming out of COVID when those committees weren't meeting a lot,
Right.
I'm more than happy to step back on that one, knowing that they're combined.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I really loved it, actually.
Great.
Thank you.
So next is our Citizens Financial Advisory Committee. Currently, Steve and Katie serve on that. Of course, the treasurer needs to be on there, so Steve will remain. Is there anyone who's interested in joining Steve on that committee?
I'm happy to stay if other people don't have interest.
Okay. Next is ESAC, our Educational Services Advisory Committee. Currently, Tanya is our rep to that committee, and Jason is the alternate.
How is that going? Because I didn't receive any emails recently about any meetings.
There hasn't been any.
There hasn't
recent-
been a meeting? Okay.
Recent.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would like to continue because they always have such fascinating topics to discuss and everything, but
Here comes Director Ertl.
Sorry, Ann.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for saying it's fascinating, first of all. Well, so similar to what Director Fisher was saying, post-COVID, we are sort of trying to recalibrate a little bit with all of these sort of different committees serving different purposes. And rather than think about how we kind of traditionally bring parents to us for this reason, separate from that reason, we've been working together and with Director Contreras as well to think about how can we repurpose some of our, maybe our parent affinity groups and some of our other parent groups to serve a variety of purposes rather than, you know, sort of these narrow purposes. And so this year, we have been kind of in a brainstorming and figuring out kind of a different model sort of year, so that's why there's been a little bit of a gap. So I do think next year, and even actually yet this spring, we are going to look at using some of our affinity and other parent groups to serve some of those same purposes that our more traditional ESAC meetings had served.
Right, okay. Well, I look forward to that.
Good.
Yeah. And I'd like to stay on.
We'll keep
if
it
it's-
fascinating.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Director Ertl. Great. Jason, are you interested in staying on as the alternate?
I am. Yes.
Okay. So next we'll move to our Special Education Advisory Committee. Jason is our representative and Shannon is the alternate currently.
I am happy to stay on as the primary lead.
Excellent.
And I'm happy to stay as the alternate, unless someone else wants to.
Okay, so our monitoring committee is our committee that is in charge of policy. We might want to think about renaming that committee, not tonight, but just to be clear that, that they deal with policy. Our vice chair chairs that committee, so Shannon will stay on, and currently Katie and Jason serve on that committee as well. Are you interested in staying on, or is there any other interest from other board members?
I mean, if anybody else has interest, in my opinion, it is one of the more, it feels like one of the more impactful committees that I've been on, especially since our commitment to looking at every policy with an equity lens. I mean, every policy has some sort of a shift, whether it's moving from his and her to their pronouns, which is a simple shift, right? Or looking at things like our catering business and making sure that we're culturally aware of the groups that we're serving. So there's a lot of stuff that actually happens in there that feels really impactful, more so than some of the other stuff. So if anybody else would like an opportunity to be on that committee, I'm more than happy to share that. But if nobody has an interest, I will stay as well. So, how's that? Plus Oscar's on it, which, bonus.
Makes
right?
it interesting.
That's great.
Nobody? I mean, I can get a clerk, but I can't get anybody on the policy committee.
I mean, I want to, but that ship sailed for me. Jason, are you interested in staying on?
Yeah, sounds like same three people, three amigos.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, well, you three have certainly done phenomenal work together, so, so that makes me happy. The Board Audit Committee, so the treasurer is on this one as well, so we can slot Steve in as number one, and then currently Shannon and Katie are on it. Are you interested in staying on, or is there other interest by other board members?
So I think, as Steve and I have talked about before, there's a lot of overlap both with timing as well as content for the audit committee and the CFAC. So I think I'll stay, since I'm staying on CFAC, I think it makes sense to stay on the audit committee. Do you guys want to sales pitch on that one? I'm just kidding.
I'm just mindful of our time. Our meeting starts in 5 minutes, and we have a few more committees to get through, so.
I'm happy to not continue if someone else wants that experience. Nope, okay.
All right, same three. Legislative Action Coalition, currently it's Shannon, Rachel, and Steve.
I would like to stay on the LAC, especially since I think school nutrition's gonna happen.
I think it is going to happen.
I feel like I just finally can actually contribute to some of those conversations and would love to stay.
As would I.
All right.
Excellent. Visioning and Strategic Planning is a committee that's called upon as needed. Currently, it's Tanya, Rachel, and myself. I'm happy to stay on or happy to give someone else that opportunity.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay on as well.
That one has not
We have,
done much over the past
we
year,
have not
right?
been called into service.
So hypothetically, I still really like the things that it is for, but again, if there's someone that feels strongly moved, I'm happy to be on it or not.
I think we're good.
I think we're good. Student Board Representatives, currently Tanya has been coordinating or serving as the liaison with our student board reps, and Katie is the alternate.
And this is really dear to my heart. I would really like to stay on, but of course, if someone does want to also be part of this, of course, they're more than welcome.
I mean, in my opinion, it is hands down the best role for a board member, and you are doing a really wonderful job with it,
thanks.
Tanya.
Thank you.
Katie, are you willing to remain the alternate?
Sure.
And then we have our Human Resources Committee. Typically, the chair serves on this, so I'll stay on. And Shannon and Steve have been on it with me over this past year. Is there interest by other board members?
Looks like
All
we're
right,
good then.
we'll stay on then. And then Safety and Security, Shannon is currently the rep, Jason is the alternate.
I'll stay on.
All right,
Good, yep.
okay,
All right.
great, thank you so much. We will take a 3-minute break and come back at 7. Good evening. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is called to order at 7:04 p.m. Our first agenda item is open agenda. This is one of two periods during our meetings when we welcome public comment. This first public comment period is for items on the agenda. I've received two public comment cards from members of our community who have joined us here in the boardroom tonight. And both of those cards have to do with items that are not on the agenda. So I will call these community members forward during our second public comment period that takes place at the end of the meeting. Next, we'll move into our reports. We are so fortunate to have our fabulous student board representatives at the table with us tonight to give us their reports. And I will turn it over to you, student board rep team.
Perfect. So I'm going to go first. My name is Isabella McCoy, and I'm the senior cohort coordinator. Students have just got back into school after winter break. We had a short 2-day week last week, but this week we are getting back into routine with a full week. My first update is the class meetings we had. On Monday, students gathered in the auditorium with their classes to discuss updates about their grade and to give students some reminders. While I can't speak for the sophomores and juniors on this one, the senior meeting went over very well. Our staff reminded us to fill out our cap and gown form and to check to ensure we have fulfilled our credit requirements for graduation. They also provided us with resources about any anxiety seniors may be having about transitioning into college. Something that went over very positively is also open lunch. Seniors have been waiting for this to be implemented, so the overall reaction was a lot of excitement. Another thing I want to touch on is spirit outfits for Winter Week. Yesterday was Jersey Day, today was a grout fit, and tomorrow is Winter versus Tropical. Thursday is PJ Day, my personal favorite, and Friday is Winter Wonderland class colors. The best outfits also have a chance to win free dance tickets. Speaking of dance, we have an upcoming Sweethearts Dance on February 11, and our prom theme is Masquerade on May 13. Students are really happy with these events, and I know many who are already planning outfits. Before we went on winter break, I got the chance to work with a Hopkins film director who was filming a video at Hopkins. We featured many of our hardworking and diverse clubs to help give people a look into the day in a life at Hopkins. The video will also be featured at an event for transitioning 9th graders. I was happy to be a part of it. The last thing I want to touch on is just a thought I had, and it was regarding our nutrition, specifically like the wellness policy. We had a meeting with Miss Ballard about it, and basically, so as a type 1 diabetic, I have to count my carbohydrates for the food I eat at school. And looking at our school menus on the website, I didn't really see any nutritional information. And considering the other diabetic students throughout our district and future students, I think it would be a great step toward inclusivity if we included some kind of nutrition information relating to carbohydrates, serving size, things like that. Maybe like a link on the website, something like that. I think it would also be great. I think I was talking with Ballard and she had mentioned there's not really like anything like that at the elementary or junior high too, so even just like something looking forward to trickle down into all of our kind of grades. And, you know, like especially pertaining to the future, while I think it's me and one other diabetic at the high school. When I went to the elementary school at Meadowbrook, I definitely know there was a lot more diabetics there for sure. So even like focusing on our elementary school, kind of something like that. But I think that would be really important, maybe if we did something like that or could look into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. I really like that idea about, you know, making our nutrition more inclusive by providing more information about what's being offered to students at all levels at lunchtime and at snack time. Do you get snack time at the high school?
We don't. We do not. But we have our vending machines. We appreciate them very much.
There you go. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. I'm Oscar Wolf, the other senior student board representative. Firstly, I just want to echo what Isabella said. I think that being more transparent about what food we offer throughout the district is a really great step towards equity, not just in academics, but I think that food is something that needs to be considered with that too. So I definitely support that change. And then I have two short updates of my own. First, regarding the Legislative Action Coalition. Today, actually, Sid Gelprin and I went over to West Junior High, and Sid did all the filming, and I was asking the questions. So we're really excited about that. We've put together a really diverse group of perspectives, from social workers to students to principals to teachers. There will be a lot of perspectives on display at that breakfast, so really excited about that. And lastly is a thought about a policy, the wellness policy. We were just reviewing this policy with Principal Ballard today, actually, and I was scrolling through the policy trying to find the section regarding mental health when I realized there isn't one. There's no mention of mental health in the wellness policy. Forgive me if it's hidden in another policy that I haven't been able to find, but as far as I can tell, there is no language coming from the district about our stance on specifically mental health. And I don't know that wellness and mental health are necessarily synonymous. So I think that it is important that even if we're not giving strict guidelines or actually anything super enforceable, I think it's valuable for the district to have an actual stance on mental health and sort of a goal for what schools should be working towards.
Thank you, Oscar. I was planning to talk a bit at the end of the meeting about, some of the things that we've accomplished over the last 3 years, because there's just been so much that has happened. And one of the things that I was thinking about as I was preparing that little reflection was how much we've invested in student mental health from a budgeting perspective, from a people perspective, from a time and effort perspective. And so I think if we had a policy that really specifically addressed our commitment to student and staff mental health, that would help create more alignment between these investments we've been making and then, how these things are actually playing out systemically. And so I appreciate you bringing that forward.
Thank you.
I look forward to talking with you more about that idea in the policy committee.
Because, spoiler alert, Vice Chair Andreessen is going to stay on as vice chair and head of the policy committee, so we're lucky.
Hello, my name is Samia, and I'm the 10th grade representative. I don't really have anything serious to report like the other two did, but winter break has ended like 6 days ago, and school is now back in session. The weather has been terrible and caused many students to arrive late. As the weather worsens, the students arriving late increases. Yesterday, all grades gathered into the auditorium for an announcement from admin and student council. I will be talking about the 10th grade's point of view of it. At the beginning, they complimented our outstanding hallway organization abilities, advised us to think about our future, and told us that failure doesn't define a person and it's an opportunity for growth, and one should not waste it. And then they called the sophomores on student council up to the stage to introduce themselves and make themselves known to the 10th graders. After that, they had audience members come up and do activities, which was a fun opportunity for students to have a fun and nice way to bring the community back together after not seeing each other for 2 weeks. Another event that student council planned was Spirit Week. Today was Gray Fit, so everyone wore gray. From what I have seen, the students participated a lot in Spirit Week. As the term is coming to an end, that means more summatives and tests are being assigned. Course registration for next year is getting close, and 2 term classes are coming to an end, so many students are going to have new schedules. In the auditorium yesterday, an admin member said that students were altering their schedules far too much, and as a school, they were generally more allowing of this before, but in the near future will change. So in 4th and 3rd term, students will not be able to change their schedules as they could now or previous years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I heard that the class meetings were happening, and I thought that was such a great and interesting idea. And so it was wonderful to hear your experience of it and some of the things that were talked about during that meeting. So appreciate it. So at the beginning of our meeting, I just jumped right in and I skipped something that we have been doing since the beginning of this year. And see, this is what happens when I'm not here for one meeting. I just get out of the rhythm of things. Are you sure you still want me to be your chair? Because I completely blew past board member introductions. And so we're going to do that before we move on to our superintendent's report. So let's mix it up. We are going to start with Director Ross tonight.
Here we go. So my name is Jason Russ, and I currently have 3 kids. If you don't know that by now, they all attend the same elementary. I have 2 fourth graders. Yes, for my constituents, I have twins at home, and I have a first grader as well. I hope they're getting to the point where they're going to be reading some books before they go to bed, part of their school reports. In addition, I've been a happy Hopkins resident for the past 8 years, and I enjoy my entire first year here on the board. I'll pass it on to my right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Khan. I have had 2 kids in the district. They've both since graduated. They both currently attend the University of Minnesota. I myself have been a resident of Hopkins for over 12 years now. I also have worked in the school district and my most favorite position was media para specialist at the high school. That ended in 2019, and I was really happy to see firsthand how hard our teachers worked with students, especially my kids. And my kids have definitely benefited from our school's academic excellence and the inclusivity and diversity that is in our schools. Thank you. Next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Andreessen. This is going to be my 4th year on the school board. I parent 2 children, one of which attends West Junior High as a 9th grader, and another one who's a recent grad from Hopkins High School and also attends the University of Minnesota. I've lived in the district for 15 years. Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, I also work as a para in our elementary schools, which I find to be delightful, rewarding, and informs my work here at the table as well.
I'm Jen Westmoreland. I am starting my 6th year on the Hopkins School Board. I grew up in this community, graduated from Hopkins High School. I am the parent of a 6th grader who attends Eisenhower Elementary's Xinjiang Academy program, and I have served as chair since 2020.
I'm Steve Adams. I've been a resident of the district for so long that you had to move into the district to attend schools here. This was pre-open enrollment. So I've got 2 adult children that attended Tanglin Elementary, North Junior High, and graduated from Hopkins High School. And this is I'm starting my 12th year on the board.
You want to go, Rhoda?
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I could have introduced myself before the report, too. Good evening. I'm Rhoda Marie Peary-Reed, superintendent. I've been in my role for 6 years. I have a 5th grader at Eisenhower. Actually, she's playing the violin right now in an orchestra concert at Hopkins High School. And I got a text saying that her super fans thought I might like the pictures that were sent, so that's nice. I do have a 9th grader also at North. And my husband has a son who is a kindergarten para in Miss Johnson's classroom at Eisenhower.
My name is Katie O'Shea Peterson. I've lived in district in Golden Valley for 12 years now, and I have a 5th and a 6th grader at Meadowbrook.
Good evening, I'm Rachel Hartland, and I am entering my 2nd year on the board here. I have 3 children in district, 2 of whom are at Meadowbrook Elementary, and 1 of whom is at North Junior High. And we moved to Hopkins 6 years ago. We chose this district to move into for my kids to grow up in, which is a decision that my spouse and I took very seriously. And one of the things that excites me most about the district is the way that Hopkins seeks input and is very receptive to perspective and wants to follow best practices, down from student input all the way up to legislator input, and I am very excited to see the community here tonight.
Thank you to my board colleagues. I feel so much better that we've done that now. And now we can move on to our superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and thanks, Elise, for sharing slides. So the last time we met, last time we had a school board meeting, it was the day before we had to cancel school. So there actually haven't been many school days since the last meeting, but there has been a lot of action with weather-related events and preparing for students' return. I have the pleasure of spending this week at our high school, checking out all of the amazing things that are happening in a very multifaceted place. You heard the reports from our scholar board reps, which give you a bit of insight. It's really incredible to experience a community of our dedicated staff and all of our learners coming together daily in such a vibrant space. As our students shared, yesterday was Jersey Day and today is Groutfit Day. I was like, what is Groutfit? So here you can see Charlie and Bella, who are wearing their gray outfits. Groutfit? Yeah. So it took me a while. Anyway, so there are lots of gray ensembles and outfits today, and it was fun to see. I do have some elementary spotlights for you. So these photos are from last Thursday, our first day back. Gatewood students literally had to climb a snow mountain in order to play in the woods adjacent to the lot. And what was really joyful about this is that some of the students had shared with their teachers that they don't typically play in the snow when they're at home. And so in the few minutes of downtime before dismissal, it was really fun to see students building snowmen and making snow angels and, of course, throwing snow at each other. Eisenhower Elementary recently hosted trilingual bingo night at Eisenhower Elementary. Kindergartners can opt into Chinese or Spanish immersion or can sign up for the English language pathway. And so at trilingual bingo, of course, students are calling letters and numbers in Chinese, Spanish, or English. Another elementary spotlight is from Glen Lake. So what started as a small project in applying for an HEF grant to install a wheelchair swing on the Glen Lake playground has turned into a full-blown passion project. Students in Miss Julian's and Mr. Trenda's class had the vision to not only install a wheelchair swing, but also to get a merry-go-round and try and redo the entire upper playground in poured in rubber surfacing, so creating an entire playground that is wheelchair accessible. They started with a goal of $300,000, and I've shared before that our Hopkins Education Foundation got them started with a $35,000 grant, and then going into winter break, they were busy writing promo letters, cold calling businesses, making posters, distributing flyers to local neighbors surrounding Glen Lake, getting on that blue Glen Lake Go bus and visiting businesses. And then over break, Miss Julian received big news that an anonymous donor wanted to send them $200,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, so this exciting news was shared with students this past Thursday. And you can see a photograph from that very festive experience with a smoke machine and lights and the media, of course, thanks to Jolene and her crew for supporting the promotion of that event. And there is actually Steve Hartman from Jolene, is that his name, Steve Hartman?
Yeah.
Yes, from CBS Evening News, spent a full day at Glen Lake, I believe yesterday, to interview staff and students, and so there is a report that you can check out online. So I think we're just so proud of course, of our teachers, but also our students for demonstrating the critical real-world skills during this detailed campaign and for accomplishing so much for their peers and really for our entire community. And so as Betsy Julian shared, our future is bright with these 10, 11, and 12-year-olds leading the way. We also have a few spotlights on secondary learning and school experiences. When West Junior High plays bingo, they call it Westo. And recently, students played a rousing game of Westo to celebrate meeting their goal of reading 1,000 books. Web leaders, and so Web is the program at our junior highs that pairs older students with incoming 7th graders, serving as mentors and providing great orientation activities so that students have a successful transition experience. Anyway, Web leaders called the numbers and letters, and winning students chose snacks or, of course, books as their prizes. West also had 3 young scholars recognized as their top readers, and these 3 readers collectively read close to 200 books. West is also effectively becoming a full-service community school that offers wraparound services to our students. Here's a picture of local barbers providing trims and haircuts to students who I'm sure loved their new look. At our high school, I shadowed Principal Ballard during her instructional visits yesterday and today. She made her rounds through the Royals Athletic Center, which hosts several PE classes during the school day. This was a visit on the left. You'll see pictures from the visit to Mr. Schroeder's unified class, where students with multiple abilities learn and play together. And Principal Ballard even joined the game of badminton for a few minutes, so students really loved that. And then on the right, you'll see at our Hopkins High School staff meeting this morning, student leaders from the GSA organization, Gay Straight Alliance, presented lots of really helpful information to teachers on strategies that teachers can engage in to create safe and welcoming conditions for all students. We also visited Jen Brandeberg's class and marveled at the many models of houses through the decades that were built by students. Ms. Brandeberg explained that students had studied architectural design over various decades and then studied the influence these architectural patterns had on interior design. And their next project is to produce classroom door designs for teachers throughout the building, and these will be produced after consultative conversations between teachers and these student designers. In my last update, I gave a shout out to our high school math league and promised to share a picture of the team at today's meeting. So here's a photo of our 23 mathematicians participating in math league this year. There are 2 more regular meets this season, and then hopefully our team will participate in the state meet on March 13, and this is if we keep our first place position in the section. Really proud of our mathematicians. On Friday, this past Friday, I attended our AMSD meeting, which stands for Association of Metropolitan School Districts. And although SUPS and school board members have the option to attend virtually, it was a full house with in-person attendance, including Vice Chair Andreessen, Treasurer Adams, and Governor Waltz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, who shared remarks and highlighted their education priorities, which include preschool for all early learners in Minnesota. Their priorities also include increased funding for public school systems across the state, as well as indexing these increases to inflation, and then, of course, closing our special education and English learner cross-subsidies. Our new Commissioner of Education, Willie Jett, was also in attendance, as were various legislators, including our very own Representative Cheryl Joachim. I'd like to recognize a full first year of service provided by our newest school board directors, Rachel Hartland and Jason Ross. And I'm sure that the learning curve has been really steep, but you climbed it seemingly effortlessly, and you've used all of your new knowledge to ask great questions and contribute in valuable ways to the board dialogue. So thank you for your first year of service and looking forward to additional meetings and additional years. And then finally, I'd like to share a video highlighting the work we are doing to prepare our 5th and 6th graders for their upcoming transition to Hopkins West and North Middle Schools. There's a lot of very careful thinking and planning that many teachers and leaders have engaged in to prepare for our students and families who will be in great hands this fall. And so here's a quick video to share more.
Our transition for next year and getting our 6th graders into our building and becoming a true middle school, there are a number of phases that we have to go through, and currently we're in the people phases of things.
We know that we are going to have new faces in our building, and those faces are going to be new students and they are going to be new staff, and we want to make sure that as new faces join our community that they feel welcome.
We are having staff and teachers from the elementaries who are coming here to visit and to see what the culture is.
I think that the staff here is very bonded to each other, that they really have each other's back and they go out of their way for one another.
It's a culture with a heart. We try to do everything with a heart behind it.
I'm excited that we get to become a true middle school and have students in grades 6, 7, and 8 here together. I also think that we have a tremendous opportunity to become more innovative in our instruction.
You know, I'm hoping, especially for our incoming 6th graders, that they feel that when they get here, they are able to continue growing and continue to feel loved and comfortable. And we are doing our best to make sure we create that environment for them and being careful in how we plan that out.
We want you to know that we are here for you, that we are ready to welcome you and your children into our spaces.
To our families, this transition that we are undergoing here in Hopkins is about you, it's about us, and it's about all of us.
We are going to take such good care of you and them as we make this transition together.
And so rest assured that everything we are undertaking is for the betterment of our scholars and our staff and our community. And we are proud to do that, and we do it with heart.
Thank you, Elise.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mary Peary-Reed. And I know we have some information sessions coming up next week for our transition to the secondary schools. I'm looking forward to attending one of them because I have a student who will be joining the West community next year, and just so grateful for all of the work that our transition team is doing to prepare for it. And I think that video really highlights that effort. So thank you. Any questions or comments for Dr. Mary Peary-Reed? I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move to our treasurer's report with Treasurer Adams.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. I've looked over the check register for the last, I guess it's 3 weeks. And some expenses of note that were on there were $215 for a Mylar balloon tower. I don't know where that showed up, but I thought that was pretty cool. That
Would it have been the all elementary band concert.
Could be. You got
Oh,
me.
yes, that was it. I was like, I knew I saw a tower of balloons somewhere.
There
Where
it
was
is.
that?
Also, the first of 2 installments for $15,000 for the Children's Defense Fund Freedom School. And to provide a little background, the Freedom School provides comprehensive, culturally relevant summer and after-school enrichment to children in high-poverty areas. And the program helps children fall in love with reading, increases their self-esteem, and hopefully generates more positive attitudes towards learning. So I think that's a worthwhile investment. Looking at, considering the season, we spent over $74,000 for snow removal in December. $110,000 for meal ingredients from various vendors for feeding our students at all of our 6 schools. Kind of a sign of the time, $10,278 down payment for prom on May 13. I see head shaking, so people are aware, the students are aware of that. $62,579 for fall tuition at Normandale Community College, and that's $62,579 in tuition that our parents in our district do not have to pay for their scholar. And finally, I'd like to thank Joan and Leroy Bear for multiple donations that they made, including in the consent agenda tonight, was a list of gifts that the district has received in the last 3-4 months. And I noticed that there were a number of donations from Joan and Leroy to apply to Ellis Smith school lunch balances. And I thought that was just a tremendous gift. I think it's unfortunate that we have to fund school lunches that way these days, and hopefully with a change in the legislature this year and with the advocacy of Vice Chair Andreessen, we'll have no more charge for lunches or meals at schools in the future. But for now, that's the situation, and I'd like to thank Joan and Leroy for their contribution. So with that, I move that we approve total disbursements in the amount of $1,726,101.38 for the period of December 14, 2022 through January 5th, 2023.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the treasurer's report. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Treasurer Adams. Now that I think about it, I wonder if the balloons, well, there were also really cool balloons at the kindergarten information night, Jolene. So I see you and the balloons. I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledged that. All right, now we can move into new business after I got that important bit of information out. And I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed as Director Chapanduca joins us at the table.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and welcome to the table, Director Chapanduca. And Mr. Seeley, are you also approaching the table? Thank you for being here tonight, sir. And Torero and Jeff will present some information to our school board so that they will hopefully adopt the resolution authorizing the sale of refunding bonds. Thank you, Torero. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Reed. Good evening, Board Chair Westmoreland, respective board members in the community. With me, I have Mr. Jeff Seeley from Ehlers. And as you may recall, on September 20th, we had brought a proposal to the board in terms of selling bonds, which were going to cover our long-term facilities maintenance, as well as a refunding of our 2013 A and 2013 B general obligation, callable bonds. We started scanning the market and found out that the interest rates were not favorable for us to do a refund. So we took a pause, and in November we brought to the board a proposal to actually just sell the deferred maintenance, long-term facilities maintenance bonds, which we always do once every 2 years. And then Ella's started really looking at the market and found out that, the market was attractive in terms of interest rates. And then we decided that it is an opportunity. As most of you know right now, the bond market is very volatile and the interest rates are fluctuating, and we wanted to take an opportunity because what this does, it actually is a positive on our debt service. If we find interest rates which are competitive and we go ahead and do a refunding of the bonds, what it does, it reduces our debt service, which has a positive impact on property taxes. That being said, usually when we sell the bonds, we all do this as a package, but this was a unique situation. So I wanted Ms. Seeley to give some context to how we ended up here and what they actually do in the background when it comes to scouting the market in terms of interest rates and decisions around refunding of bonds.
Very good. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. As Torero mentioned, this was an opportunity that we were looking at last fall. You have two bonds which are callable in February, and that means you have an opportunity to refinance or refund those for direct savings to the taxpayers. As everyone knows, those interest rates last year spiked quickly, especially at the end of the year. And what it did is it eroded all the savings that we were estimating, made it not feasible to move ahead with the refunding portion. So we broke that off and went ahead with the facility maintenance bond portion. Now rates over the last month have kind of plateaued and they have started coming down. We looked at this again a couple weeks ago and realized rates had dropped to the point where it made it feasible again to move ahead. And you have this opportunity with these call dates that you will want to take advantage of it if there's savings. Obviously, if there isn't, then you pass on it. So we're bringing it back to the board. And in your board package, you have a resolution, and that resolution authorizes us to move ahead with the sale of the bonds, the refunding bonds. We'll sell new refunding bonds, take those bond proceeds, pay off the two existing bonds. That's how that works with the refunding. It also enrolls you in the state credit enhancement. The resolution does enrolls you in the state credit enhancement program. That's a program where the state will step in and make the payments should there be a default. It lowers the risk to investors. It also creates a situation where you have a better interest rate when you issue these bonds. So just to hit a few highlights, there's a pre-sale report in there. These bonds are going to be a 7-year bond, so it's fairly short. It's going to refund 3 principal payments or maturities of your 2013 A bonds and 3 maturities of your 2013 B bonds, and replace, basically, those will get paid off and you'll have one bond, so we're combining it into a single bond. Both of those original bonds were the old alternative facility bonds, which was the predecessor to the facility maintenance. So they're both for the same purpose originally, for all facilities. We estimate that the savings will be about $233,000. Now, if rates keep coming down a little bit, it should be higher. Obviously, with as volatile as rates are, our concern is that we might see rates start swinging upwards. And if that's the case, if they swing up enough, then we would just put this on hold again. But at this point, it looks to be very feasible. We just had a rating with the facility maintenance bonds. We just went through that process. These bonds will be rated We'll go through that process again because every bond carries its own rating. It'll be in a shorter version of the interview and so forth. But we'll go through that, and you'll carry both the underlying rating, which is the rating for the district, and then the credit enhanced rating. So have two ratings. We'll do a competitive bid sale. So we'll advertise it nationally, collect bids, and we will bring those to you on February 7th. So we will accept bids the morning of February 7th. You have a meeting that evening. We'll bring the results to you, and then you'll have a resolution awarding the sale of those. In the meantime, we'll put together the official statement. We'll go through a rating process and so forth. Then the new bond will close, which means that's when the bond proceeds are transferred to the district. In this case, it will go to an escrow agent on March 2nd, and then on April 4th, that escrow, the money in the escrow will pay off the two existing bonds, and they will be paid off at that point. There's some schedules in here that show your existing bond payments on those two outstanding bonds, what we estimate the new payments to be, but the page 10, the last payment, shows that we're estimating annual savings, an average of $39,000. It fluctuates quite a bit annually, but it's about $234,000 worth of savings that we estimate. So you have a resolution in front of you, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Director Chapanduka and Mr. Seeley. Director Chapanduka mentioned that this is a unique situation, and it sure is. We aren't used to seeing you this frequently at the table, and so welcome back, and thank you for walking us through. Certainly appreciate your vigilance on behalf of our taxpayers to save money and to make sure that we're getting the most favorable rates in this volatile market. Wondering if my board colleagues have any comments or questions.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes, Director Adams.
I have a question. Could you restate what the anticipated savings is, but also over what period of time?
$233,000, and it's through over the next 6 years, from 25 through 2030, the annual savings you'll see over that 6-year period.
Fairly short time frame.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. All right, thank you.
Other comments or questions? So this is a resolution, so we'll have to do a roll call vote, which is great because, spoiler alert, we will probably be changing clerks tonight when we do our officer election. So we want Clerk Peterson to have one last opportunity to do a roll call vote. So this is well timed. So I would look for a motion that the board adopt the resolution authorizing the sale of refunding bonds.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the resolution. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Thanks. Should I go in order of favorites?
Yeah.
Director Ross.
Aye.
Director Khan.
Aye.
Vice Chair Andreessen.
Aye.
Chair Westmoreland.
Aye.
Director Adams.
Aye.
Director Hartland.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye.
I heard 7 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries. Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we will move on to our enrollment update and projections. I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed as our enrollment team makes their way to the table. We had a really wonderful discussion during our workshop about the presentation that you're about to see. We'll try to capture some of that for you here during the meeting. Our enrollment team continues to work so hard to bring us accurate projections, and these, of course, are really foundational to our budgeting process that we'll be moving into here in January. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and I thought you provided a great intro just now, so welcome Pam Carmen, Nick Lightfoot, Truro Chapanduka, and Jolene Goldati. You did provide a detailed and thoughtful report earlier, so thank you for all of the time to you and many others the time involved in putting together that report, and we look forward to hearing the highlights of that right now. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to again be with you to present the information that we have regarding the enrollment update and projections. As we did the work with the workshop and acknowledged all of the effort and work that has gone into this to get us to this point, we do want to make sure that we thank all of the individuals that are involved on a daily basis in helping us to make sure that we do the work involved with the enrollment practices that we have that occur throughout the course of the entire year. And we just want to make sure that we acknowledge all that goes into it as we give this set of information to you this evening. As we also identified, as we've been doing this work over time, we know that the enrollment data helps us tell a story. And it's our hope that as we continue to work through this information, that this is an informative opportunity as well as an opportunity to exchange ideas and information and to give us a sense of where we are headed for the purposes that this data helps us shape, as well as gives us information on how we can kind of plan and explain the steps that we're taking to move forward into the future. So with that, next slide, please. The enrollment touch points, all of this information really feeds itself into work that we do with the budget, with staffing, transportation, planning, and, for example, system transitions. As we know, we'll be looking at 6th grade and 9th grade transitions. The enrollment data helps give ideas and sets of information about how we need to be mindful of planning for example, 400 to 500 ninth graders who will be joining the high school community next year, and what does that mean for capacity in our serving lines? Just as kind of general touch point sets of information that are critically important just to the general operations as well as to the daily experiences of all of our individuals that experience our programming here in Hopkins. Next slide. Part of the projection process includes multiple determining factors. As I've mentioned before, we use a cohort projection process, which looks at what our experience has been in the previous year and what that is anticipated to be in the next year. As we do that work and take into consideration previous year impacts, we also know that there are various factors that influence and have impact on enrollment in general. 3 that are identified here, some critical components. Charter schools, as we look at charter schools and the impact of choice and what that means for us as a district. We'll have a couple slides that we'll walk through that will outline some of that information. Demographics, some of the key information that we look at are just sets of data that are descriptors for our community, such as birth rates within Hennepin County. Reason that that is important is because using that set of information with zip codes allows us to look at our anticipated kindergarten enrollment and have a better sense of what we would look toward for planning for the next year as we think through staffing and programming related, just even in that grade as an example. We also look toward housing trends. There's specific information that we know about any general building information, as well as available housing, as well as any changes that might be shaping the landscape and thinking about what that might mean for us. That helps us to get a set of information that allows us to build that into the formulas that we use to look at what we project and where we will arrive for our average daily membership, our ADM, which funds us and serves as one of the critical components of our revenue. Next slide. So here are some of the sets of information and general takeaways from the stories that we've been seeing so far as we've done our initial data review. Factors that are stable. We see kindergarten enrollment being stable. We see kindergarten resident retention being stable. As we identified in the workshop, this year we looked at 535 and our planning points. We went a little bit above that this year. As we look at our birth rates, as we look at within the county, and as we look at stable sets of demographic information, we are looking at that same estimate right around 535 for next year. So we see that as a stable factor in our enrollment and our planning. Our overall enrollment in and enrollment out percentages remain stable as well. We've seen, as you'll see in slides upcoming, that we see that stability within the level of interest that we maintain for individuals and families who are looking at Hopkins and the opportunity, and as well for those who may be making other decisions as they consider what options are available to them as well. The other stable factor that we look toward is immersion enrollment within all of our immersion programs. As we mentioned in the workshop, we do now is our prime time to collect information from and applications to Hopkins schools, specifically with our immersion enrollment in kindergarten. We'll have slides of that information upcoming. That information is consistent as well, which reflects previous years, and we anticipate consistent enrollment in our programming for those programs as well. Last bullet item is really under the stability component. No significant change in open enrollment from pre- and post-pandemic years. We see that remaining consistent. Some things that are changing, and as the narrative, as we unpacked the sets of information that we looked at from last school year, not necessarily maybe a trend, but specifically information that is important to us as we build that into consideration around what we anticipate for next year's revenue, is that we're starting to see increased mobility at all building and grade levels. That increased mobility, as we discussed at the workshop as well, really in the second bullet, identifies that where we are seeing mobility, and we track mobility throughout the course of the school year, as well as over the course of the summer months, so that we get an idea of what happens during the school year, as well what happens from the end of the school year to the beginning of the next. As we look at that, where we have seen the greatest sets of increase are moving out of the district to other areas within the state, out of Minnesota, and finally out of the country. Those are key takeaways. You will see, as a result of that increased mobility, a slight decrease in the upcoming school year and 5-year projections. As we have seen those numbers increase, we do know that throughout the course of that mobility and the information that we track, that has been an increasing factor as more mobility throughout the course of the state, and as we have also seen from within neighboring districts as well, that mobility is playing itself into our consideration and into our formulas. As I mentioned, this has increased the mobility that we've been looking at significantly since the start of the pandemic. As we mentioned, really, resident families moving outside of our district accounts for the highest mobility rate that we see. So the reasons for departure. We've been working with the enrollment office and enrollment office staff to collect additional sets of information that we do with the exit interviews as individuals leave. What we saw in 21-22 is reflected here for you with the total. Where we have identified is you'll see the larger areas that we've highlighted in previous slides with moving out of the district, moving out of state, moving out of country, increasing. Where we have remained consistent, transferred to another district, as I mentioned in the stable factors, those coming in throughout the course of open enrollment remain stable. Those that have transferred to another district remain stable over the course of the years that we've been doing the collection. In the workshop, I think it also is important to highlight the care and treatment element. As you look at care and treatment, just a note for the community that care and treatment are facilities that do provide services and supports to individuals in a care and treatment capacity, whether that be for mental health or other health needs. And that can be for a period of time that may be for a duration of a year or maybe a shorter period of time. But we do document that so that we can track those individuals who have been with us but are not here for the full year, because all of that information factors into the revenue component. So we want to make sure that we keep that information in front of us as well. As noted in the workshop, that is also an area of increase that we have seen over time. Much potentially, if you will, may have some impact and consideration. Thank you for mentioning Policy 533, which is the wellness policy, and more information that we'll be looking at as we do that review as well. So open enrollment. Open enrollment continues, as also was mentioned in the introduction, to be one of the key components of our enrollment landscape here within Minnesota. We have been tracking that consistently over the years that we have been detailing the enrollment and the enrollment projections for the board. Next slide. And part of what we look at when families choose Hopkins are we look at the reasons why. You'll see specifically the information here that we captured from individuals as they've told us in the conversations about why Hopkins, why this space. As some of you even have commented in your opening comments, that there are those spaces where choice has an impact, and we want to make sure that we reflect those voices and have that as part of the choice as well. Next slide really looks at the increases in open enrollment into Hopkins. You'll see that as we look from 2018-19, as we mentioned pre-pandemic, to where we are now in 22-23, we continue to see, and that increase was 145 scholars, we continue to look at that component throughout the course of it. As we've mentioned, fairly stable with what we've seen in previous years, increases over others. As we look at birth rates within Hennepin County and neighboring school districts, fairly consistent and stable, as you will see from the set of data that is contained there. Next slide. The other component that does remain consistent are the top incoming districts that we look at. You'll see 1855 and the scholar number there, open enrolled into Hopkins in 22-23 from 42 districts. We do continually have experiences within the top 6 incoming districts that are reflective of previous years, and that has been a stable factor also. Next slide. We also track the total open enrollment by grade and site. As you look at the consistency over time and you look at kindergarten and you look at 12th grade, you'll see kindergarten at 150, you'll see 12th grade at 140. Those numbers vary slightly in their, their deviations from one another, but do remain fairly consistent on any given year when we look at the open enrollment by grade. Based on proximity, based on building, you do see some variability within elementaries specifically, as well as within secondaries based on the enrollment counts and where those sit. One of the other takeaways that we've been looking at is we now have a year of virtual EDU, our virtual online program. And with the launch of this program, we now have that set of data which allows us to look more fully at the enrollment element. One of the takeaways that we have from that is that it really has the highest open enrollment potential. And as we did that level of analysis, you'll see here that those percentages in elementary, secondary, and the total overall do reflect a larger portion of open enrollment than we were originally anticipating. That component, as part of our workshop dialogue, important to understand that this has the ability to reach beyond those districts that geographically neighbor us into additional opportunities beyond Hopkins to allow us to look at how we might be able to reach individuals when they are interested in exploring a virtual option and creating that opportunity for those in a broader context. And that, of course, has information that informs our marketing and our work to make sure that we are informing the communities around us of the options that we have available. As well, we track open enrollment out. Currently, as it states in the notes there, Hopkins residents' families open enroll out to 33 different public school districts. The top 5 represent about 88%. You'll see those reflected. Those, again, have been consistently stable over time and generally the same percentages over those years as well. Another demographic component that we track, another influential factor, is charter schools. You will see in charter schools that those, at least for the past couple cycles, have remained the same. One of the changes that we have seen, and this I think is an example of when programs are located within the geographic boundaries. So for example, Agamemnon, and Isla used to be located within Hopkins, and as they have moved their locations, the numbers of individuals who have chosen those options has shifted, with smaller numbers choosing those options that influence Hopkins in our overall projections. You can see that from the slides there, just as an example of Isla, which recently moved from its Hopkins location. What we have seen is we've seen a little bit of increase that was mentioned in the workshop as well into Eagle Ridge, but for the most part, we have seen those consistent as well. So kindergarten, as we talked a little bit about that as a key entry point into our system, we looked at around 535 as our initial number for this year, and right now, as of October 2022, we're at 546, and that has remained consistent throughout the course of the year. A key entry point, key number that we look at. The breakout of that, thank you, Elise. The breakout of that is that we do see total immersion entry points for families, about 119 of that number, so that you can see that 427 choosing the traditional programming, 119 looking at immersion options. What we do know is that some of our largest retention rates and strongest retention rates do exist in immersion programming. And so we keep that as a factor for us as we look at this as a formula item within our total consideration. Throughout the course of the work that we've done with kindergarten enrollment projections, this one is generally the more difficult one to really look at because we use birth rates, we estimate, we get some general consensus ideas of what's happening in the community. We give this to you as an example of where we've really kind of landed with where we thought we would be. And you'll see that some years we do get those outliers, like in 21, 22, where we just didn't know how to estimate really the number of individuals who held off for a year and then entered in 21, 22, who could have entered in 2021, but chose to hold off with a kindergarten entry point. And we know that from birthdays and ages that there were many families that chose to do so, and that's why you see that in 2021, 22, and why you'll see that we made that modification in 22, 23 when we weren't tending to see that same type of experience reflected. And as I said before, where we landed in 23, 24 is really that estimate around 535, reflecting patterns seem to indicate reflecting what we have experienced this year was likely to be reflected again next. And then the final slide, the ADM enrollment projection that really guide a lot of the work that we do with the budget planning and the enrollment aspects. I'll turn that component over to Director Chapin-Duca.
Thank you, Dr. Lightfoot. As alluded by Dr. Lightfoot, yes, the final slide in graph gives a summary of all the information which has been provided. From a projection standpoint, we try to be very conservative. And as you can see from that graph, our numbers are pretty flat. I mean, when we start to look at the aggregated projection from an enrollment standpoint, we are anticipating a flat enrollment component across our system. And what this might mean from a revenue standpoint, just putting into consideration that we are still waiting for more information from the state. And we know we had a little over $80 million in terms of surplus. What we don't know is the component of how much will be funded by the state into school districts. Also putting into consideration some of the shifts which are happening in our system with the 6-9 configuration, as well as some of the shifting in buildings as students move from one building to another, and other economic factors, for example, when we start to look at our negotiations with an average of about 10% cost of living adjustment, when we start to look at inflationary components, which will all play a factor in terms of how we allocate resources into our buildings. So we'll bring more information as we get this information from the state. But at this point in time, from a conservative standpoint, we are just projecting a flat increase across our system from a enrollment standpoint, which also means probably a flat revenue allocation as we wait for more information and allocate those resources into our buildings.
And then again, with the last slide there, I do believe that that should complete the set of information that we have put together for you this evening. I know we had the opportunity to dialogue in the workshop, and certainly are available for any more comments, questions that would be related to the set of information that we have for you this evening.
Well, thank you very much to the team that's here tonight and all of our Hopkins staff who worked on compiling the data and really creating this cohesive narrative so that we as a board and our community can understand what's happening with our enrollment. I commented at the workshop that this team is so good at accurately projecting our enrollment that they make it look really easy. And I know it's really, really hard to do. And as you saw on one of the previous slides, that we have come so close every year to really understanding who is going to be in our buildings and how that impacts our budgeting. I think a major theme that came out at the workshop was the fact that, yes, obviously this impacts how we budget, how we're going to be moving through this process throughout January, February, all the way to our final budget approval in June. But it's about so much more than the money, right? It's about understanding who is in our district, who is choosing our district, why, who's leaving our district, why. One of the topics that came up was housing and specifically affordability. And we know that we are in the midst of an affordable housing crisis nationwide, and certainly here throughout Hennepin County and in our community. And so curiosity around how that is impacting families' abilities to either stay within the district if they are already in-district Hopkins students, or move into the district if they're seeking to do that. We know that housing stock is just really limited and even more limited when it comes to affordable housing. So one piece of this puzzle in helping us understand this is we will have a presentation at a future board meeting about students who are experiencing homelessness and highly mobile students and what we can be doing to support them and their families holistically. And Jolene and I dialogued a bit at the workshop about collecting data when families leave the district, and perhaps at other points as well around how affordability is impacting some of these enrollment trends. Other board member comments or questions for this team, or if you'd like to recap anything we talked about during the workshop that you think might be important for our community to hear?
Westmoreland.
Yes, Director Adams.
We talked about this at the workshop, but I'll reiterate it for a new audience, hopefully. I'm sure a lot of citizens have seen a lot of construction going on in our district. And I've seen it over in Golden Valley. I've certainly seen it along the Southwest Light Rail. And in West End, Opus. I mean, there's a whole lot of multifamily housing going in. Why is that not contributing to our enrollment projections, or is it?
Sure. As we addressed in the workshop as well, what we tend to see is when certain units are built, what we know from the housing analysis that we've done is that depending on the type of unit and depending on the cost level, which was mentioned, we know that we get, for lack of term, a yield or the likelihood that there will be a family with young children living in that unit. And as part of what we've seen, much of the build has been focused on apartment components. For example, as you mentioned, the West End, and if you look at some of that new building and new construction there, and just using Meadowbrook and Meadowbrook's experience over the past, while those units were being built, is that we haven't necessarily seen young families move and or choose those locations and those spaces to the point or the effect that it has influenced our enrollment within the schools that are close to that. So that has been, I would say, kind of a lived experience that we know. And what we've also seen, and I think the data supports as well, is that we've seen if we have individuals who have chosen spaces that are not as permanent as the single-family home choice for many individuals over a period of years, we know that that also contributes to some of the mobility. So we see more of the mobility, we see more of the choices that people are making given the kind of housing options that are available. So that is continual work that we do throughout the analysis. And as we get information from cities and the construction of what they're planning to do, that also is a good dialogue for us about what they see in their own trends as well as they plan for their city work as well.
Thank you. I'll just share with you a comment that I heard from the city manager in Golden Valley a couple of years ago. I said, they're building all this, all these multifamily units at the West End. Who's buying them all? Or I don't know if they're for sale or for rent, but he said, well, the developers are really targeting young female professionals. And that doesn't bring students into our district. So I suspect that between that and senior housing, which is another growth market in within the district, that probably accounts for the fact that we're not going to see a lot of, as you call it, yield from those in students. So thank you.
Other board member comments or questions for this team?
I have a question. May I ask, when we are looking at projections over the next several years out to 27, what assumptions are going into that with regard to virtual EDU? Is that growth there, or is that based on our current numbers?
Oh, sure.
Either way, go right ahead.
I mean, everyone can chime in too. And again, I mean, we started the virtual EDU about 2 years ago. And as we previously discussed at the workshop, we've seen a lot of fluctuation with mobility within just the virtual EDU. 1 week, students want to be in virtual EDU, and then the next week they want to be back in the buildings. So we have been using the little information we have in terms of how we've always done projections using historical information, since we didn't have the historical information, and seeing the shift where there is a lot of fluctuation when students opting to be either in virtual EDU or to be in classrooms. So we've factored in a number of components based on what we are seeing between what we had projected, for example, this year, and the actual number of students who are actually participating in virtual EDU. And then we start to factor in some of the conditions from a marketing standpoint, like Jolene had alluded, initial approach on what this might look like, especially when we put into consideration that when students move from either a brick and mortar program into virtual EDU, that's moving resources from that program into the virtual EDU, and want to make sure that we have stability in both ends. One continuing virtual EDU, as well as the programs which are being offered in the buildings. So to answer your question, Direct Heartland, right now we are actually in experimental mode. We are trying to figure out how this will pan going into the future, and also trying to capture the market, bringing in students into this program instead of just having students shifting mostly current students shifting between the virtual EDU environment and the brick and mortar programs. So that's where we are, and as we move on, we'll try to identify other variables which may lead us to at least get us to a level playing field when it comes to how we are projecting virtual EDU and any other students in our programs. Anything else to add?
The other thing I might add to that is that we've done a little bit of research about how long it takes to develop a program like virtual EDU and help it turn profit. And the average span for that is about 6 years. So it really is an investment we expect that will take a little bit of time, I think, to understand given the volatility in the climate, and then also just it takes time to build a program in a school.
Certainly, I think that kind of background information is very helpful to all of our community members, not just the people sitting at the board table. And I can really appreciate, though it's this very large opportunity, that we're giving it all the time, that it needs to grow, and that those numbers are not currently really inflating or having a large impact at this moment on projections. Thank you for that info.
Any other board member comments or questions for this team? Well, thank you very much. I always think it's challenging for you to join us both at the workshop and then do it again at the meeting. So really appreciate your time and thoughtfulness in preparing the report and responding to our questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, team.
So we will move to our last order of new business, which is our board officer elections and committee assignments. So we discussed the plan for this during our workshop. So if you tuned into that, you can just kind of zone out here for the next few minutes while I give our community a bit of context. So every January, we elect board officer positions. There are 4: chair, vice chair, treasurer, and clerk. And then we decide which board members will serve on various committees. The reason we do this in January is because of how our school board election cycles work. So school board members are elected in November elections and then sworn in January. So all of our terms began in different Januaries, because we were elected in different years. And then, so each year we do this officer election, even if there are no new school board members. We did a bit of talking about historical context and how long people typically serve in some of these roles. And it really depends on the board and who's on the board. So sometimes the chair role might change year to year. Other times somebody might stay in the role for 4 years, hypothetically. And we talked about kind of the importance of having continuity on a lot of these committees, especially coming out of COVID. There was a lot of shifting around regarding how these committees were meeting, what their configuration was, and so that also kind of guided our discussion too. Was kind of a general consensus around providing some continuity in terms of committee assignments moving forward for this year. So we will first elect our board officers. And since we do this once a year, not every meeting, thank goodness, I refreshed myself on the Roberts Rules procedures for how to do this. And there's one unique part that I just want to prepare you for, that Roberts Rules requires that I ask if there are any other nominations, no less than 3 times. So if you think that I'm doing something really awkward, it's Robert's Rules told me to do it. Okay, so we will start with the position of chair. So nominations are now open for the position of chair.
I nominate Jen Westmoreland.
I accept the nomination. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Nominations for the position of chair are now closed. All in favor of electing Jen Westmoreland as chair for the next year, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. I would be honored to continue serving as your chair. Thank you very much. Nominations are now open for the position of vice chair.
I would like to nominate Shannon Andreessen for vice chair.
Shannon, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Nominations for the position of vice chair are now closed. All in favor of electing Shannon Andreessen as vice chair, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Congratulations, Shannon, and thank you for your willingness to continue to serve as vice chair.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland.
Nominations are now open for the position of treasurer.
I nominate Steve Adams.
Steve, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Nominations for the position of treasurer are now closed. All in favor of electing Steve Adams as treasurer, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Congratulations, Steve, and thank you
Thank
for your
you.
willingness to continue serving as treasurer. Nominations are now open for the position of clerk.
I nominate Jason Ross.
Jason, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, I do.
Ooh, cliffhanger. Okay, are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Nominations for the position of clerk are now closed. All in favor of electing Jason Ross as clerk, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Congratulations, Jason. You have secured the coveted role of clerk, and we are so grateful to you. Yes, wonderful. So next, we will approve the committee assignments that we decided during the workshop right before this meeting. You can, the committee assignments are linked in the document in the board packet, so you can take a look at which board members will be serving on which committees. So I would look for a motion to approve the committee assignments for 2023.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the committee assignments for 2023. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Well done, team. All right. Next, we'll move into board member reports. Who would like to start?
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
I know.
I was about to call you Clerk Peterson, and that is no longer your title, Director Peterson.
Thank you. So mine's not as much a report as it is a little shout out as a parent. On Thursday, our first day back at school, I had the opportunity of visiting the bus depot. So I would just like to state that A, the phone was promptly answered when I called at 4:30
Wow.
on Thursday. I mean,
Wow.
bananas.
4:30 a.m.
No, PM.
Oh, I
Sorry.
was like, what?
PM.
Okay, PM.
Which
Okay,
was
okay.
like the crazy bus day.
Right.
Not only did John answer, he called our bus driver, found my daughter's gear bag that had, during a series of unfortunate events, made the bus when she did not.
Oh.
And she had a field trip the next day to go skiing. So to say that emotions and tensions were high, it's an understatement. John was amazing. He got the gear bag. He held it for me. And when I walked in that Lake Country bus depot, the mood and the energy was amazing. People were smiling. People were greeting me. They didn't know who I was. Like, I was just a mom with a kid who was crying. And it was phenomenal. Like, all the drivers were happy to be in safe. They got the kids home on time. And they even got my daughter her snow pants before her field trip. So, like, shout out to our transportation department. They were amazing.
Wow. Transportation success. Amazing. That's great. Who would like to go next? Vice Chair Andreessen's leaning in.
Oh,
Just
that was just so I could
Just like
see.
leaning in.
see.
Oh, I thought you were like ready to go.
Oh,
like
with
gearing
that
up.
cue, I'll do it. 2 days after our last meeting, we had an audit committee meeting, and I thought it was here in person, and I showed up, and no one was here in the parking lot, so I found out that, no, we're meeting via Microsoft Teams, so we did it virtually. And then last Friday, as Superintendent Mary Perry Reed indicated, I attended the AMSD legislative kickoff. A number of our legislators who represent the district were there. Some stayed and some didn't, so we have some photo ops that were missed, but at any rate, it was a very informative session, very upbeat. The governor is very adamant about increasing funding for public schools, which was great, and I don't know how many standing ovations were given during the morning, but it was the most upbeat legislative kickoff I've been to, I think. In passing, I would like to note the passing of some people that have been integral to the Hopkins district over the years. Jim Schluck, who was an art teacher for 34 years in the Hopkins School District, at West Junior High, North Junior High, and at Lindbergh, predating the current high school, passed away last month. And he had the honor and the distinction of being the girls softball coach in their inaugural season at Hopkins. So he was, by all accounts, a really wonderful guy. I would also like to note the passing of Barb Latondras, who taught for 34 years at the high school and is the mother of our prior school board member, Chris Latondras. And Barb, besides being a great teacher and very empathetic, was a great friend. And then I would also note the passing of Barry Bonoff. Barry was a volunteer at Gatewood School for 15 years. And he was the father of Terry Bonoff, who served on the LEC and then was on was a state senator for many years. So, and he was a great guy. I'll just relate one anecdote about Barry. He was in the retail fashion business for years as a CEO of Jackson Graves, a long departed women's fashion store. But I ran into Barry a couple of times after he retired. And one of the times, I believe, was at Gatewood, where he did volunteer work, helping kids with their reading. But I was at Kramer's Hardware in Glen Lake, and there's Barry, walking around the store with his vest on, and obviously an employee. I said, "Barry, what are you doing here?" And he said, when you're in retail, you really can't get out. So he worked part-time at Kramer's, which no longer exists either, in Glen Lake for many years. But all of them will be greatly missed and made major contributions to the lives of our students in the Hopkins School District.
Thank you very much, Director Adams. Who would like to go next?
Chair Westmoreland, I just have a
Ross.
quick call out. So the Hopkins women's basketball team will be playing on January 13th. That's coming Friday. Students are free to get in, so if you have opportunity to attend, it's at 6:30 p.m. We're going to play Hopkins or Eden Prairie, so please turn out. And then, last but not least, in our backyard, we're going to have the Hopkins Royal Rumble. My son is going to be partaking in that with his team. So shout out to all the future Hopkins High School students, basketball association team. It's going to be fourth graders, I believe, up to eighth grade. I'm sorry, I'm only following fourth grade because that's very much my son plays in. So
It is fourth through eighth.
it's too many kids to follow. But all Hopkins has been performing well. So all day Saturday and all day Sunday, get your shoes on and watch those Hopkins Royals rumble it up.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. It's going to be at the various locations of the high school, Tangleton, and North Junior High.
Oh, wow. The entire campus up there.
Some of us will be working the concession stand.
Oh, my. Well, just like so many reasons to go. Any other board member reports?
And we just have a small correction from the audience. The varsity game starts at 7. But if you want to have a seat, get there by 6:30.
Thank you.
Nuance. So I had the opportunity to attend the inauguration of Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, as well as our state's constitutional officers. And I was really pleased that, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan always speaks about her commitment to youth and families, and that's really been a hallmark of her career in public service. And so she really focused on that in her speech. And Governor Walz also focused on youth and families and specifically talked about the need to fully fund public education tied to the rate of inflation, to eliminate the special education cross-subsidy and fully fund school meals, and address youth poverty statewide. And so just hearing those priorities from that stage, knowing that now with the trifecta, that we do have the opportunity to make those things happen, just felt incredibly hopeful, and it was an honor to be able to attend. Tomorrow I'm attending a special event right here in our community. There's a new business, Hopkins Halal and Getty Grill, that's opening, specializing in East African cuisine. They are having their grand opening beginning at 1, and I was asked to come and say a few words welcoming them on behalf of the district. Our former board colleague, Fartuna Ahmed, and her husband, Munasser, have been instrumental in bringing this business to Hopkins, and it's so wonderful to see yet another Hopkins business that reflects the vibrant diversity of our community. On Friday, I'll be presenting at the MSBA conference on a panel entitled Supporting LGBTQ+ Students in Schools. Really excited to join my colleagues or our board colleagues from Osseo Schools to present that. It's at Friday at 9:15. I don't know the room right offhand, but if you are there, you already know what I'm going to say, but if you want to hear what our colleagues in Osseo have been working on, that would be a great opportunity for my board colleagues who are attending the MSBA, which stands for Minnesota School Boards Association Conference that's taking place on Thursday and Friday this week. Our Hopkins Education Foundation Royal Bash will be taking place on February 25th. Tickets are on sale now. I excitedly purchased tickets for my partner and myself to attend, and I'm really looking forward to that event. It is so fun and special every year. I am also part of a team that's working on a fundraiser for Resource West that will be taking place on March 14th at Hopkins Center for the Arts, and I will be bringing more information to you as the plan solidifies for that. It will be open to the entire community and a chance to get together and celebrate who we are as a community and raise some funds for this great organization that supports so many of our students and families here in Hopkins schools. So our last new business agenda item was to elect officers, and I was really honored to be reelected chair by my board colleagues this evening. I was first elected chair in January 2020, and as I was preparing for tonight, I was reflecting on how much we've all accomplished together during that time. I attend a lot of events here in our community and throughout the Twin Cities, and I'm often asked about our work on the Hopkins School Board. I always talk about my fantastic student-centered board colleagues, our visionary superintendent and district leadership team, our dedicated staff, and our phenomenal students who have such diverse backgrounds and interests, who are incredibly socially aware and engaged. And of course, our deeply supportive community. And we have some community members in our audience tonight, and I know folks joining us via the YouTube live stream, and so many community members, some of whom don't have kids in our schools, who take a vested interest in the success of our district. So I'm so proud of and grateful for our collective work toward implementing Vision 2031. And I just wanted to name some highlights, because I think when we are so in this work every day, it's really important to kind of take a step back and reflect on some of the things that we've accomplished together. This is not a comprehensive list. That would take hours, but these were some of the things that came to mind as I was reflecting on my board service and our service together this afternoon. So some of these steps that we've taken toward implementing Vision 2031 have included an anti-racist, equity-driven, and inclusive approach to policymaking, resulting in more specific policies that protect the rights of students and will allow us to fully implement restorative practices district-wide. And I'd like to recognize our monitoring committee, Shannon, Katie, and Jason, for their incredible work in this space. Intentional investments as a board and as a district community in social, emotional learning and mental health. A structurally balanced budget and a new way of budgeting that gives school leaders more autonomy to determine how resources can best be used at their sites. And I'd like to acknowledge Director Chapanduka's work, as well as our CFAC and Citizens Financial Advisory Committee, and Katie and Steve for your work in this space. An expanded partnership with ICA to bring more food resources, more food and resources, including social workers, into our school spaces, and continued partnerships with Resource West, Move Forward, My Health, and of course our Hopkins Education Foundation. Expanded intergovernmental collaboration between the City of Hopkins, Hennepin County, and Hopkins schools to more holistically meet the needs of youth and families in our community, including employment and job training opportunities for young people, as well as a new collaborative that we're working on to really expand this work and enact structural change in our community with youth voice at the center. Personalized learning opportunities district-wide that honor the unique and layered identities of each of our students and really put them in the driver's seat of their own learning. I'd like to acknowledge our innovation design and learning team that has just done incredible structural work in this space, as well as developing assessment metrics that more holistically and accurately measure student learning and abilities and that are much more relevant than standardized tests. Improved transportation district-wide, as Director Peterson talked about earlier. A more inclusive academic year calendar that more accurately reflects the religious and cultural diversity of our community. I'd like to acknowledge Oscar and all of his work in that space, as well as our staff who were tasked with making this calendar actually happen and align with state statute and our commitments to our teachers union. And that work has been so deeply appreciated within our community. Continued strong advocacy to our state legislators to fully fund public education, including school meals, and the fulfillment of the state's legal obligation to fully fund special education. Thank you to our Legislative Action Coalition, including Rachel, Shannon, and Steve, who serve on that body. A revamped student board representative model that brings students into our board committee work and continuously makes space for their honest and authentic voices at board meetings. Tanya, I'd like to thank you for facilitating this program. Oscar is like our last student board rep standing at the table tonight. The other two had to go do work to prepare for tomorrow, no doubt. So Oscar and all of our student board reps, thank you for your continued commitment and service. Increased clarity around board operations and communications, and I'd like to thank Rachel for her advocacy and work in that space, and community engagement, both formal and informal, with our phenomenal community. Every decision that we make at board meetings is important because it directly impacts the lives of thousands of young people and their families in our community. And each decision we make here must then be carried out by Hopkins staff members who work incredibly hard each day to move us closer to Vision 2031. As an educator, I know firsthand how challenging it can be to implement new policies and practices, and I appreciate the work of our talented staff very much. This work that we do together at this table, in our community, in our schools, is challenging, it's hopeful, and we have so much more of it to do together. And I'd like to thank you for your continued trust and partnership.
Thank you.
So we will move into our second public comment section. And we have 2 public comment cards. I'll read the guidelines for public comment, and then I will invite our 2 community members up to the table individually to share their comments with us. The Hopkins School Board believes that hearing from our community members is crucial for implementing Vision 2031. If you wish to contact the board via email instead of publicly commenting at a meeting, you can use our contact emails on the board page of the district website. And telephone numbers are there as well. We welcome conversations with you. We know that sometimes it can be difficult to attend board meetings, or that's not your preferred method of communication, and we always welcome that type of one-on-one communication too. At board meetings, public comment is received during 2 different periods: for items on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, for items not on the agenda at the end. And these are the guidelines for public comment. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Public comment is for input only. Members of the school board will not respond directly to public comments that are made at this meeting. No specific action will be taken at this meeting in response to comments that are made or issues that are raised during the public comment period related to items not on the agenda. If the board determines that action is appropriate, that action will occur at a future board meeting. If you have left your contact information on the comment card, a district representative may follow up with you after the meeting. I will recognize 1 speaker at a time. Only those speakers who are recognized will be permitted to speak. Individuals who interfere with or interrupt speakers, the board, or the proceedings may be asked to leave. Personal attacks on any individual, including any other speaker during the public comment session, are unacceptable, as are obscenities or profanity. Persistence in making such remarks will end the individual's opportunity to address the board and may result in the individual being directed to leave. I will rule out of order any statement that would violate state or federal law, school board policy, or the privacy rights of an individual. Minnesota's open meeting law prohibits the discussion of private educational data during an open meeting. Accordingly, during the public comment session, no person may discuss private educational data on an identifiable student. The open meeting law also requires the board to close a meeting for preliminary consideration of allegations against an employee. Accordingly, community members who have concerns about an employee or want to file a complaint or allegations against an employee are encouraged to contact the superintendent directly. We ask you not to name an employee during your comments. Repeated violations of these time, place, and manner restrictions may also lead to the meeting being briefly recessed. Community members will have the opportunity to be heard within the limits of the law and subject to the time, place, and manner restrictions above. Thank you for listening to all of that and for participating in public comment this evening. So first, I'd like to welcome Michonne Ross to the table.
Visuals, good evening. Science, visual, hopefully you all can see it. I have math. also the reading. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Michonne Ross. I'm a resident of Hopkins. I also am a former reading para specialist in the district. I have 5 adult children, 4 of whom graduated from Hopkins High School. 2 have become teachers. I'm here tonight to follow up on a previous public comment which pointed out the declining academic assessment testing in our district and asked the school board to formulate solutions. Sadly, in the months that have passed, the school board has made no effort to propose solutions to this very legitimate concern of declining students' performance. Instead of the group identified as a Hopkins Instructional Leadership Team appeared at the November 15th board meeting, where we were treated to opinions provided by paid educational consultants. And based on what is written in the newspaper, the residents of Hopkins School District have not received proposed solutions, but instead a litany of excuses. Tonight, I'd like to respond to comments published in the local newspaper. Our superintendent deflected attention away from the MCA testing, suggesting the learning loss was induced by the pandemic. However, the data that has been provided to this board and to the media clearly shows test scores have been declining in Hopkins for a decade, long before anyone has ever heard of COVID. Once again, I would like to call your attention to the data from the Minnesota Department of Education that demonstrates a 10-year proficiency trend for the Hopkins School District in math, reading, and science. Note the steady downward flight of students' proficiency from 2013 to 2022, tracking 10 years of consistent decline. It's worth noting these scores are alarmingly below of our neighboring districts. The article went on to include comments from educational consultants paid by the district. I would like to share observations on 2 of them. One consultant stated that the district math scores in 35% to 42% range meets target. 35 to 42% meets target. So my question for the board and to the consultants that our tax dollars paid for is simply this. In what world does math scores of 35% meet target? We all know in this room that that's not true. Another consultant, a social emotional screener, proudly pointed out high scores among Hopkins students in cultural awareness, but offered no explanation as to how these skills will serve students in the real world. The real world is where math, reading, and science learning counts. Perhaps this lack of academic focus is why more than 1,000 students from the Hopkins district chose to open enroll in Minnetonka Public Schools this year, which the data suggests the #1 reason for moving to a neighboring district is the pursuit of stronger academics. Perhaps these families of these students understand cultural awareness scores provided by paid consultants
Thank you very much.
account for very little in the world. Thank you, and I appreciate your time tonight, and I would just ask you to reconsider your ways for the sake of our children and calling.
Thank you very much.
And calling good evil and evil good. Thank you. Please consider for the sake of our children.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Chris Fields to the table.
Watching your body language, if you didn't like her, you certainly not gonna like me, but I will not be rude or disrespectful, okay?
Welcome.
Okay, so here's what I want to talk about. I sat here seething. I said, I'm not gonna be disrespectful or rude. This meeting had nothing to do with helping one student. Sitting around here and shout outs and all this. What in the heck are we doing? And I do have a vested interest as someone who pays for failure of education, and I do. How do I pay for the failure of education? I paid $500,000 in income taxes and payroll taxes. Because you guys want more, and more for what? I did 22 years in the Marines, 65% achievement in reading proficiency? That is good for nothing. That will get you thrown out of the military service. You guys will all sleep tonight because of the people that are on those ships and flying those planes. They do their job. You can too. There is nothing wrong. Do I believe that you guys are decent people? I don't know you guys, but presumably you are. Come on, man, we can do better than this. And do not tell me about racism and test scores. You know who built those bridges? People who passed standardized tests. You know who put the people on the moon? People who passed standardized tests. In fact, I used to work for one of the guys who flew the Hubble telescope up there. Standardized test. Don't tell me about racism. Don't tell me about this LGBT, blah, 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 all of these social issues. We are here, the schools are here to educate children. Educate, and I didn't hear one thing tonight that advances that cause. This is not the meeting for the bake sale. I watched you guys, I paid attention. None of you guys understood what the finance guys were talking about. I have an MBA, I got a degree in finance, I understood. It was gobbledygook. I mean, I'm not saying that the guy did anything wrong, right? But those are complex things, and 2 minutes of freaking speaking in a meeting ain't gonna freaking help you guys understand or help this community. And then to make people sit here for 2 hours while you guys are sitting around here, woo, I feel good about this and I feel good about, hey, again, there's probably a time and place for that, but if this meeting is supposed, this board is supposed to be about helping children advance their cause, you didn't. In 1984, I graduated high school in the South Bronx, valedictorian, and I had a 600 SAT score because of this, because people want to feel good. I did what I had to do to get myself right. Okay, you guys can do better. I really believe it. You guys can do better. That's the challenge. Peace. I'm out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is adjourned at 8:56 p.m. Thank you all so much.